Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into a world that feels both beautiful and quietly hostile, where the trees stand frozen like silent witnesses, and the air itself seems to resist your breath. You move forward into a medieval winter forest, boots pressing into untouched snow, each step soft but strangely loud in the stillness. The cold settles in, immediately wrapping around your face, slipping through your clothes, testing you. And just to be honest with you right away, you probably will not survive this. Not without learning very quickly how people once endured this kind of place for months at a time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I would love to know where you are listening from tonight, along with your local time. It is always fascinating to see where these quiet stories travel. Now dim the lights. You stand at the edge of the forest for a moment longer than necessary, as if your body understands something your mind has not yet accepted. Behind you lies the idea of warmth, of walls of predictable meals. Ahead is a long stretch of frozen wilderness where every choice matters more than you would like. You take your first real step inside. The snow compresses beneath your foot with a soft crunch, and the sound seems louder than it should be. The air smells clean, almost painfully so sharp with pine and frost. It fills your lungs with a kind of clarity that feels refreshing at first, but there is a subtle dryness that scratches at your throat. A widely accepted historical observation tells us that medieval hunters in northern Europe often travelled deep into forest during winter seasons, sometimes for weeks or even months, relying entirely on their skill and preparation to survive. These were not brief excursions. They were long commitments to isolation, risk, and patience. You move slowly not because you want to, but because the ground demands it. Beneath the surface of snow could be hidden roots, patches of ice, or uneven terrain. One wrong step, one twisted ankle, and the story ends here before it even begins. The trees close in around you, tall and dark, their branches heavy with snow. Occasionally a small cascade falls from above, a soft whisper, as powder drops from a branch that can no longer hold its weight. You flinch slightly each time your sense is already sharpening. It is quiet. Not the kind of quiet you find in a library or a sleeping house, but a deeper kind, one that feels like it belongs to the land itself. There are no distant carts, no human voices, no comforting signs of life, only the faint creak of wood as trees shift in the cold and the soft rhythm of your own breathing. You notice your breath almost immediately. It forms pale clouds that drift away and vanish. Each inhale feels colder than the last. You instinctively pull your clothing tighter, though it does not seem to make much difference yet. There is a peculiar detail noted in some lesser-known accounts from early Scandinavian regions that hunters would sometimes deliberately breathe through wool or fur coverings, not just for warmth, but to reduce the shock of freezing air entering their lungs. It sounds simple, almost obvious, but here in this moment you understand how something so small could matter. You keep moving. Stopping too long at the edge would be a mistake. The forest is not something you ease into. It demands that you commit. Your body begins to react to the cold in quiet ways. Your fingers feel slightly stiff. Your nose tingles. There is a subtle tightening across your face, as if your skin is trying to shrink away from the air. You rub your hands together, more out of instinct than strategy. Historians still argue whether medieval hunters fully understood the physiological dangers of prolonged cold exposure, or whether their knowledge was entirely practical, passed down through experience rather than theory. Standing here now, it seems likely that survival came from observation, from trial, and sometimes from painful mistakes. You walk deeper. The light changes almost without you noticing. The forest filters it into a muted glow, soft and grey, as if the world has been wrapped in a thin veil. Shadows stretch longer than they should, blending into one another, until depth becomes difficult to judge. Time feels strange here. You cannot hear the passing hours. There are no bells, no voices marking the day. Only the slow shift of light and the growing awareness of your own body. Your stomach reminds you of its presence. Not with sharp hunger, not yet, but with a quiet expectation. You have not been here long and already your body is thinking ahead, calculating in its own way. You pause for a moment, just a moment. You listen. There is something almost comforting in the stillness, but also something unsettling. You realize how quickly your mind begins to search for patterns for movement, for any sign that you are not alone. A branch snaps somewhere in the distance. You freeze. The sound is faint but clear, not the soft fall of snow, something heavier, something deliberate. Your heart beats a little faster, not in panic, but in awareness. This forest is not empty. It never is. You are simply another presence within it. You wait, listening carefully. Nothing follows, no second sound, no movement. Slowly you exhale. A curious tidbit from medieval folklore suggests that hunters sometimes believed forests themselves were alive with spirits that mimicked sounds to mislead travellers. While that belief leans toward the mystical, it reflects a very real experience. In a place like this, sound behaves strangely. Distance distorts it. Direction becomes uncertain. You move again more cautiously now. Each step feels more deliberate. You begin to understand that survival here is not about speed or strength. It is about attention, about noticing small changes, about respecting the environment rather than trying to dominate it. The cold deepens as the minutes pass. It is not sudden, it is gradual, almost polite as it works its way through your clothing, into your muscles, into your bones. You flex your fingers again, trying to keep them responsive. You realize something important. This is only the beginning. You have not yet built a fire. You have not yet found shelter. You have not yet secured food or water. And already the forest is making its presence known, pressing gently but firmly against your limits. You look around, taking in the trees, the snow, the endless repetition of shapes and shadows. There is no clear path, only choices, and each one carries weight. You take another step forward, then another, letting the rhythm settle into your body. Your breathing steadies, your senses sharpen further. You begin slowly to adapt. Not comfortably, but enough. The forest does not welcome you, but it does not reject you either. It simply exists indifferent and immense, waiting to see if you can learn its rules. And as you move deeper into its frozen quiet, you begin to understand that staying alive here will not come from a single skill or a single moment of strength. It will come from many small decisions, made again and again, with care, with patience, and with just enough awareness to keep going. You keep moving, and after a while, the rhythm of your steps becomes steady enough that you can pay attention to something else. The cold is no longer just a sensation on your skin. It has begun to settle into your clothing, into the layers you carry, testing each one as if it were a question waiting to be answered. You glance down at yourself, at what stands between you and the slow pull of freezing air. It suddenly feels less like clothing and more like a fragile system. Every piece matters. Every gap matters even more. A well-established historical understanding tells us that medieval hunters relied heavily on layered clothing, especially wool and fur, because these materials trap air close to the body. That trapped air becomes your real insulation. Not the fabric itself, but the invisible space within it. You shift your shoulders slightly, feeling how your outer layer brushes against your arms. It is stiff in places, especially where frost has begun to gather. That stiffness is not just uncomfortable, it is a warning. Moisture is your quiet enemy. You might expect snow and ice to be the obvious dangers, but it is actually dampness that turns deadly first. Sweat from your own body melting snow that seeps into seams, even your breath freezing and thawing against fabric. All of it slowly steals heat away from you. You pause for a moment and adjust your sleeves, rubbing the fabric between your fingers. It feels thick, uneven, slightly rough. That roughness is useful. Smooth cloth does not hold heat the same way. Texture creates tiny pockets where warmth lingers. There is a small detail mentioned in some lesser-known medieval records that hunters would sometimes wear garments inside out on particularly cold days, especially if the inner lining had more texture. It sounds like a strange choice, but here, standing in this cold, it makes a certain kind of sense. You pull your collar closer to your neck. Your breath brushes against the fabric, and for a moment you feel a small pocket of warmth gather there. It is faint but noticeable. You instinctively lean into it, letting your chin slightly. Even this small adjustment feels like progress. The forest remains quiet around you, but you are beginning to notice more subtle sensations. The way the cold shifts when you move. The way your back warms slightly under effort while your hands remain stubbornly cold. Your fingers, you flex them again, slower this time. They respond, but not as quickly as before. There is a slight delay, as if your body is sending signals through thicker and thicker air. You tuck your hands briefly under your arms, pressing them into the warmth of your body. It helps, but only for a moment. There is an ongoing scholarly discussion about whether medieval hunters fully understood the long-term dangers of frostbite, or if they simply reacted to symptoms as they appeared. What seems likely is that they learned through repetition through experience that was sometimes harsh and unforgiving. You imagine what it would mean to lose feeling entirely. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a slow fading until your fingers no longer belong to you. You push that thought aside and keep walking. Your legs feel stronger than your hands, partly because they're working constantly. Movement creates heat. You can feel it building in your thighs, a steady warmth that contrasts sharply with the cold air pressing against your outer layers. This creates a strange balance. Too much movement and you sweat. Sweat leads to dampness. Dampness leads to cold. But too little movement and your body loses its abilities to generate heat at all. You begin to understand that everything here exists in careful moderation. You adjust your pace slightly, slowing just enough to keep your breathing steady. You notice how your chest rises and falls, or how the air feels sharp on the way in and slightly warmer on the way out. Your face tightens again as the light breeze passes through the trees. Wind changes everything. Even a gentle movement of air seems to slip through your layers, finding weaknesses you did not know existed. It presses against your clothing, stealing the thin warmth you have built. You turn slightly, angling your body so the wind meets your side instead of your chest. It is a small instinct, but it makes a difference. A curious anecdote from certain northern communities suggests that hunters sometimes layered their clothing unevenly on purpose, reinforcing the side of the body most exposed to prevailing winds. It is not something you would think about in comfort, but here it feels almost obvious. You continue deeper into the forest. The trees grow denser, their branches forming a loose canopy that softens the falling snow. The ground beneath you becomes more, even though still unpredictable. You notice your feet now. At first, they felt fine, protected by thick coverings, but as time passes, you begin to sense a dull pressure, a gradual cooling that creeps in from below. Snow compresses under your weight, and even with insulation, the cold finds its way through. You shift your toes inside your footwear, wiggling them to keep blood moving. The motion feels awkward at first, but then slightly comforting. This is how it happens, you realise. Not in sudden, dramatic moments, but in quiet, almost invisible changes. A finger stiffens, a toe cools, a sleeve dampens. Each small detail adds up. You stop briefly beside a tree. Its bark is rough beneath your gloved hand, solid and unmoving. You lean against it for just a second, feeling the contrast between the living wood and the cold air. Your breath slows. The forest smells faintly of resin and frost. A clean scent that carries a hint of something ancient. You close your eyes for a moment, not to rest, but to listen more carefully. Nothing moves, or at least nothing you can detect. You open your eyes again. The light has shifted slightly, though it is hard to tell how much time has passed. Without the sun clearly visible, you rely on subtle cues, shadows, brightness, the way the forest feels. You push away from the tree and continue. Your clothing rustles softly with each step, a quiet reminder of its presence. It's no longer something you take for granted. It is your barrier, your protection, your fragile shield against a world that does not adjust for you. You adjust your collar again, then your sleeves, then your stance. Small corrections. Constant awareness. This is how medieval hunters stayed alive, not through a single perfect solution, but through continuous attention to details that might seem insignificant anywhere else. You take another breath, steady and controlled. The cold is still there, pressing, waiting. But you are beginning to understand how to meet it, not by fighting, but by adapting. And as you move forward, step by careful step, your body and your awareness begin to align slowly, shaping themselves to the quiet, demanding logic of the frozen forest. You continue forward, and after a while a new thought begins to press itself into your awareness with quiet urgency. Fire! Not as an abstract idea, not as a comforting memory, but as something immediate, necessary, and fragile. The cold around you is no longer just uncomfortable. It is persistent, patient, and slowly accumulating. Without a source of heat that you can control, this place will win in the end. You slow your steps, scanning the ground more carefully now. Snow blankets almost everything, but not completely. Here and there, small branches push through the surface dark lines against white. Fallen limbs lie half buried, their shapes softened, but still visible. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that medieval hunters rarely relied on a single method of making fire. Flint and steel were common, yes, but so were ember-carrying techniques. Fire was not always created from nothing. Often it was preserved, protected, and transported like something alive. You kneel slightly and brush away a thin layer of snow with your gloved hand. Beneath it, the ground reveals small fragments of wood to dry in places where the snow has not fully sealed them. You pick one up, turning it between your fingers. It feels light. That is a good sign. Dry wood burns. Wet wood smokes, struggles, and wastes your energy. You begin to gather a few pieces, tucking them carefully into a fold of your clothing where they might stay protected. The movement warms you slightly, just enough to remind you that action has value. You look around again. Not all wood is equal. Some branches snap easily clean and sharp. Others bend, resisting holding moisture within them. You test a small twig, applying gentle pressure until it breaks with a soft, satisfying crack. That sound feels important. There is a subtle but valuable detail mentioned in lesser-known northern traditions that hunters would listen closely to the sound of breaking wood to judge its readiness for fire. A clean snap often meant dryness. A dull bend suggested hidden moisture. You gather more. Not too much. You cannot afford to exhaust yourself, but enough to begin thinking about what comes next. Fire is not just about wood, it is about structure. You need small pieces to catch first, then slightly larger ones to build, and finally thicker branches to sustain the flame. Without this progression, the fire fails before it begins. You shift your weight, standing again, and glance upward. The trees above you are heavy with snow, their branches layered in white. Some of that snow will fall eventually, sometimes without warning. Building a fire directly beneath such weight would be unwise. You take a few slow steps, searching for a space that feels slightly more open, where the canopy thins just enough to reduce that risk. The forest does not offer perfect places, only better ones. You find a small clearing, if it can be called that. The trees are still close, but there is a slight gap, a sense of breathing room. The ground here is uneven but manageable. You crouch again. The snow must be cleared first. You push it aside with deliberate movements, exposing a patch of earth beneath. It is cold, of course, but more stable than the shifting surface above. A fire built directly on snow would melt its own foundation, sinking, weakening, and eventually smothering itself. You create a small circle, not large, just enough to contain what you're about to attempt. Your hands move more carefully now. This matters. There is an ongoing scholarly discussion about whether medieval hunters preferred to carry embers rather than repeatedly strike sparks in harsh winter conditions. Many believe that keeping a small coal alive inside a container of ash or fungus was far more reliable than starting from nothing each time. You imagine that now? A faint glow hidden, protected waiting. You check yourself, your clothing, your belongings. If you had such an ember, this moment would be easier. But even without it, the knowledge remains useful. It reminds you that fire is something to be maintained, not just created. You arrange the smallest twigs first, forming a loose structure, leaving space for air to move through. Too tight and the fire suffocates. Too loose and it fails to catch. You pause for a second, looking at what you have built so far. It seems simple, but here simplicity carries weight. You take a breath, slow and steady. The air feels sharper now that you're not moving as much. The warmth your body generated while walking begins to fade, replaced by a creeping chill that reminds you time is not on your side. You continue adding slightly larger pieces, building upward, creating a small, careful shape that can grow if it catches. Your fingers move more slowly now. Not because you want them to, but because the cold is beginning to settle deeper into them. You flex them again, trying to maintain control. There is a quiet tension in this moment, a sense that everything depends on something small, something fragile, a spark, a glow, a beginning. You imagine the sound of it, the faint crackle as flame takes hold, the subtle shift in the air as heat begins to push back against the cold. You imagine the smell, too, the dry scent of burning wood, sharp and comforting at the same time. It is not just about warmth. Fire changes the space around you. It creates a center, a point of focus, something that turns this endless forest into a place you can temporarily claim. You adjust one last twig, then sit back slightly studying your work. It is ready, or as ready as it can be. You look around again, listening. The forest remains quiet, watching, indifferent. A small, almost forgotten detail from old accounts suggests that some hunters spoke softly to their fires as they built them, not out of superstition alone, but as a way to focus their thoughts, to slow their movements, to give attention to each step. You understand that now. This is not something you rush. You bring your hands closer to the center, preparing for what comes next. The cold presses impatient as ever, but here in this small, cleared space, you're about to introduce something that does not belong to the forest. Something that pushes back, and as you lean forward, careful, deliberate, aware of every movement, you begin to understand that fire is not just a tool, it is a lifeline, one that must be earned, protected and respected, because once it is gone, the silence returns, and the cold always waiting takes its place again. You remain crouched for a moment, your small arrangement of wood waiting in front of you. But another realization slowly takes priority. Even if the fire catches, even if it grows steady and warm, it will not be enough in its own. Night is coming. You do not see the sun directly, but the light has begun to thin, softening into a dim grey that feels heavier with each passing minute. The forest shifts with it. Shapes blur slightly, distances stretch, the quiet deepens. You stand again, brushing snow from your knees, and turn slowly in place. Shelter. Fire can warm you, but without protection, the heat escapes into the open air, carried away by even the faintest breeze. Worse if the weather changes, if snow begins to fall more heavily, or the wind strengthens, your fire may not survive at all. You need something more. A widely accepted historical insight tells us that medieval hunters rarely slept in completely exposed conditions during winter, unless they had no other choice. Even the simplest form of shelter, a windbreak made of branches or a shallow depression in the ground, could dramatically improve survival. You begin to look differently at the forest. Before it was a space to move through. Now it becomes a space to read, to evaluate, to question. You step carefully, circling the small clearing you created, scanning the terrain. The ground slopes slightly in one direction. That matters. Cold air tends to settle in lower areas, pooling like invisible water. Sleeping at the bottom of a dip could mean waking up colder than expected if you wake at all. You move uphill just a little, not far. You do not want to stray too much from your fire site, but enough to find a better position. The trees here grow closer together, their trunks forming a natural barrier. You pause between two of them, noting how the wind feels weaker here. It is subtle but noticeable. You turn your body slightly, testing it again. Yes, this spot offers some protection. There is a lesser-known detail from early alpine regions suggesting that hunters often chose sleeping spots not based on comfort, but on how the wind behaved at ground level. They would sometimes spend several minutes simply observing drifting snow or loose debris to understand airflow before settling. You watch the surface now. Fine snow shifts gently across the ground, tracing faint lines that reveal the direction of the breeze. It moves past this spot, not directly through it. That is enough. You begin to gather branches, not the smallest ones this time. You need structure, something that can stand, something that can block. You test each piece as you pick it up, checking for strength, for dryness, for shape. Your hands work steadily, though they are slower than before. The cold has settled deeper into your fingers, making each movement slightly more deliberate. You lean several branches against the trees, angling them inward to form a rough wall. It is uneven, imperfect, but it creates a visible boundary. You step back and look at it. It does not look like much, but here appearances mean very little. You add more branches, weaving them loosely, filling gaps where the wind might slip through. Snow collects between them, adding an extra layer of insulation. It seems counterintuitive at first, but snow when undisturbed traps air just like your clothing does. This simple wall begins to feel more solid. There is an ongoing academic discussion about whether medieval hunters preferred quick temporary shelters like this or invested time in more elaborate constructions. The answer likely depended on circumstance. Energy, daylight, weather, and available materials all shape the decision. You feel that balance now? You could build more. You could reinforce it further, create a roof dig deeper into the ground. But each action costs energy, and energy is not something you have in abundance. You settle for enough. You clear a small area at the base of your makeshift wall, brushing away snow until the ground beneath is visible. Then you gather loose branches and lay them down, creating a thin barrier between your body and the frozen earth. The difference is immediate. Even before you sit, you can sense that this layer will help reduce the cold seeping upward. You lower yourself carefully. The ground is still cold, of course, but less aggressive, less direct. You exhale slowly. For a moment, you simply sit there listening again. The forest has changed with the fading light. The quiet feels heavier now, more complete. The occasional creak of a tree sounds louder, more distinct. You glance back toward your fire site. It is only a short distance away, but it already feels separate, like another small world within this larger one. You will need to move between them carefully. Too far and you lose the benefit of the fire. Too close and you risk smoke sparks or instability. You stand again, brushing your hands together, and take a few steps back toward the fire. You check the arrangement once more, adjusting a few pieces, making sure everything is ready. Then you return to your shelter, back and forth. This is how the system begins to form. A place for warmth, a place for rest, a careful balance between the two. There is a curious note found in certain medieval travel accounts that some hunters preferred to position their shelters slightly above their fires, allowing heat to rise towards them while reducing direct exposure to smoke. It required careful placement, but when done correctly, it improved comfort significantly. You consider that now looking at the slight slope of the ground. Perhaps tomorrow, if you remain here, you will refine this arrangement. For now, this is enough. You sit again, pulling your clothing tighter around you, tucking your hands close to your body. Your breathing slows, steady and controlled. The cold is still present, pressing gently but persistently. But now, for the first time since entering the forest, you have something that pushes back. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to continue. You glance once more at the trees around you, their dark forms blending into the dim light. The forest remains vast, indifferent and quiet. Yet within it you have carved out a small space, a fragile pocket of intention. And as the light continues to fade and the temperature begins its slow descent into deeper cold, you understand that choosing where to rest is not just about comfort. It is about survival, and tonight this place will have to hold. You remain seated for a while, feeling the small protection of your shelter settle around you. But the cold does not stop. It never stops. It only changes pace quietly, pressing in through every weakness it can find. You shift slightly, testing the ground beneath your makeshift bedding. The thin layer of branches helps, but it is not enough on its own. You can feel the chill rising from below, slow and steady, as if the earth itself is breathing cold into you. You look at the snow around you again, this time with a different kind of attention. At first, it seemed like the enemy. Something to brush aside, something to avoid. But now you begin to notice something else. Where snow is deep and undisturbed, the air feels different, softer, almost insulated. A well-established historical observation notes that snow, despite its icy nature, can act as a surprisingly effective insulator when packed properly. Medieval hunters in colder regions sometimes used snow itself to create shelters that trapped body heat far better than open air ever could. You lean forward and press your hand into the snow beside you. It resists slightly, then gives way, compacting under pressure. Beneath the surface, it feels less brittle, more cohesive. You dig a little deeper, brushing away loose layers until you reach a denser section. It is still cold, of course, but the sensation is different, less biting, more contained. You begin to understand. Instead of sitting on top of the cold, you can shape it. You stand again, moving a short distance from your branch wall. Not far, just enough to find a patch of deeper snow. You test it with your foot, pressing down until it holds. This will do. You begin to dig, not wildly, not with large movements, but with steady, controlled motions. You use your hands first, then a piece of wood as a makeshift tool, scooping and pushing, carving out a shallow hollow. The work warms you slightly. Your breathing deepens, your muscles engage, and for a moment the cold retreats just enough to remind you that movement is still your ally. You pause, occasionally listening, adjusting, checking your surroundings. The forest remains quiet, but the light has dimmed further. The shapes of trees are now darker, less defined. You feel time slipping forward, urging you to finish. You return to your task. The hollow grows slowly wide enough for your body, deep enough to provide some protection. You smooth the sides with your hands, pressing the snow into firmer walls. There is an interesting detail preserved in some northern traditions that suggests hunters would sometimes line the interior of snow shelters with branches or animal skins, not only for comfort, but to prevent direct contact with the snow, which could still draw heat away over time. You remember the branches you gathered earlier. You return briefly to your shelter, collecting a few of them, then bring them back and lay them carefully inside the hollow. They form a thin barrier, uneven but effective. You lower yourself into the space. Immediately the difference is noticeable. The wind no longer reaches you in the same way. The air feels stiller, less intrusive. Your body heat, faint as it is, begins to linger rather than vanish. You pull your clothing tighter again, tucking your hands close, adjusting your posture so that you take up less space. This matters. The smaller the space, the easier it is to keep warm. There is an ongoing academic discussion about whether these simple snow hollows were used regularly by medieval hunters or only in more extreme conditions. Some believe they were a common technique, especially in regions where materials for traditional shelters were scarce during winter. Sitting here now, it feels like something that would quickly become habit. You glance toward your fire site. The distance is still manageable, but you are aware that moving back and forth will become more difficult as the night deepens. You will need to plan carefully to minimize unnecessary movement. You listen again. The forest has shifted into night. Not suddenly, but gradually, as if the light has been gently lowered rather than switched off. The sky above is hidden by branches, but you can sense the darkness settling in layers. A faint sound reaches you. Not close, not immediate, but present. Perhaps wind moving through distant trees or something else shifting quietly beyond your sight. Your mind considers possibilities, then lets them pass. You cannot chase every sound. You focus instead on what you can control. Control your position, your shelter, your heat. You adjust the branches beneath you again, making small corrections, seeking a balance between comfort and insulation. Every movement is slower now, more deliberate, as if your body is learning to conserve energy without you having to think about it. There is a curious note found in certain medieval accounts that some hunters preferred to create very small snow shelters barely larger than their bodies, and is specifically to maximize retained warmth. It might have felt cramped, even uncomfortable, but it increased their chances of lasting through the night. You understand that now. Comfort is not the goal. Survival is. You lean your head back slightly, resting it against the packed snow behind you. It feels firm, almost supportive. The cold is still there, but it no longer surrounds you in the same way. It has been shaped, managed, reduced. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, not yet, but to feel. Your breathing slows further, each inhale measured, each exhale soft. The air inside your small hollow feels different from the open forest, less sharp, less aggressive. You open your eyes again. The darkness has deepened. Your fire, once lit, will become more important than ever now. It will be your source of light, your source of warmth, your connection to something other than the endless cold. But here in this small carved space, you have something else. A pocket of stillness, a quiet resistance. The forest remains vast, stretching far beyond what you can see, filled with unknowns and quiet dangers. But within it, you have created a place where the cold does not fully rule. And as you settle more fully into the hollow, adjusting your position, Pulling your clothing close, you begin to understand that survival here is not about eliminating the cold. It is about working with it, shaping it, using it, until it becomes something you can endure. You ease yourself out of the hollow after a short rest, careful not to undo the shape you work to create. The snow holds its form quiet and patient, as if it remembers your effort. You brush a little loose powder back into the place and stand, letting your legs take your weight. Again. Your attention shifts outward. Shelter and warmth matter, but they cannot carry you for long without something more. Hunger has been quiet so far, almost polite, but it will not stay that way. In this cold, your body burns through its reserves faster than you might expect. You look at the forest again, this time with a different purpose. Not just where to stand or where to sleep, but where life moves. A commonly accepted historical point tells us that medieval hunters rarely chased animals recklessly through deep snow. Instead, they relied on patience, on observation, and on letting the environment reveal its patterns. Energy was too precious to waste on long pursuits that might end in nothing. You take a slow step forward, then another. Your pace changes almost without you noticing. Softer, more deliberate. Each foot placed with care, not only to avoid noise, but to avoid unnecessary effort. Lifting your legs high through snow would tire you quickly. Sliding them forward slightly, letting them skim the surface, feels more efficient. You test it again? Yes, it works. The forest responds in small ways. The sound of your movement softens. The rhythm becomes smoother, less intrusive. You pause. Listen. There is no immediate movement, no clear sign of animals nearby. But that does not mean they are not here. It only means you have not yet learned how to see them. You look down. The snow stretches before your blank surface at first glance. But as your eyes adjust, you begin to notice irregularities. A slight depression here, a faint line there, something that interrupts the smoothness. You crouch again, leaning closer. A track, not fresh past, but present. You trace it with your eyes, following its direction. It moves between trees, curving gently, disappearing behind a small rise. You do not know what made it yet, but you recognize its importance. A lesser-known observational detail from certain medieval hunting traditions suggests that hunters often spent more time studying tracks than actually pursuing animals. The forest, they believed, spoke through these signs. You only had to learn how to listen. You stand again and follow slowly. Not rushing, not committing fully, just observing. The track leads you through a narrow space between trees where the snow is slightly deeper. You notice how the impressions change, becoming less defined in softer areas. That tells you something about time, about how long ago the animal passed through. You're not just walking anymore, you are reading. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how precise medieval hunters could be in identifying species from tracks alone. Some scholars suggest a high level of skill, while others believe much of it relied on context rather than exact recognition. Standing here, it feels like a mix of both. You do not need to know everything, only enough. You continue forward. Your breathing remains steady, controlled. You resist the urge to hurry. Every step is a choice, and each choice carries weight. A faint sound reaches you, very soft, almost nothing. You freeze. Not suddenly, not sharply, but gently, letting your body settle into stillness. Your breath slows further, your senses stretching outward. There. Again, a faint shift like something brushing against snow. You turn your head slightly, careful not to make abrupt movements. Your eyes scan the space between trees, adjusting to the dim light. Nothing, or at least nothing obvious. You wait. Time passes differently in moments like this. Seconds feel longer, more deliberate. Your body remains still, conserving heat, conserving energy, while your mind stays alert. A subtle movement catches your eye. Far ahead, between two darker trunks, a shape, small. It moves again, barely visible, blending with the shadows. You do not step forward. You do not call out. You simply watch. A curious note from older hunting accounts mentions that successful hunters often describe their role not as chasing prey, but as becoming part of the landscape long enough that animals no longer saw them as a threat. It required patience that felt almost unnatural. You understand that now. Your stillness becomes your tool. The shape moves again, then pauses. Perhaps it has sensed something. Perhaps it has not. You remain where you are. Your body begins to cool slightly without movement, but you accept that trade. This moment is not about comfort. It is about opportunity. The animal, whatever it is, lowers its head briefly, then shifts position. You catch a clearer glimpse now, small, light, possibly a hair. Your mind registers the details quickly, but you do not act on them yet. You are not ready, not in position, not prepared. A well-recognized historical pattern shows that medieval hunters often observed animals multiple times before attempting a capture, learning their habits, their paths, their timing. A single moment rarely defined success. You let the animal move. It drifts slowly across your field of vision, then disappears behind another cluster of trees. You exhale quietly. Not disappointment, not relief, just acknowledgement. You have seen something. That matters. You take a slow step backward, then another, retracing your path carefully. You do not want to disturb the area more than necessary. You want to remember it to return later with better preparation. Your body warms slightly as you move again, the gentle rhythm restoring some heat to your limbs. You glance down once more at the tracks, committing their pattern to memory. The spacing, the depth, direction. Details. Always details. You turn back toward your shelter and fire sight. The forest remains quiet, but it feels different now, less empty, more alive even if that life stays hidden. You walk steadily, conserving energy, keeping your movement smooth. Hunting here is not about speed. It is about patience. About understanding. About waiting long enough for the forest to reveal what it holds. And as you return to your small carved space, carrying with you the memory of movement in the distance, you begin to realize that survival in this place depends not just on what you do, but on what you choose not to do, on restraint, on observation, on letting the forest speak first. You return to your small shelter with careful steps, the memory of that distant movement still lingering in your mind. The forest has shown you something, but only briefly, like a quiet hint rather than a clear answer. You settle near your fireside again, aware that chasing animals through deep snow would cost more energy than it gives back. So you begin to think differently, not about pursuit, but about waiting. A well-documented pattern from medieval hunting practices shows that traps and snares were often more reliable than direct hunting in winter conditions. When movement is costly and prey is cautious, letting the forest work for you becomes the wiser choice. You kneel near your collected materials, brushing snow aside again, and begin to look at the branches with a new purpose. Not just fuel, structure, mechanism. You pick up a thin, flexible twig and bend it gently. It resists, then curves without snapping. That kind of flexibility matters. You test another, too brittle. It breaks with a sharp crack. You set that one aside. You begin sorting, creating small piles without even realizing it. Strong pieces, flexible ones, straight ones, each with its own role. The cold presses against your fingers, again slowing them, but you keep working, rubbing your hands together occasionally to keep some warmth alive in them. You glance toward the direction where you saw movement earlier. If that animal passed through once, it may pass through again. You stand and walk slowly back toward that area, following your earlier path with care. These tracks are still visible, faint but present. You study them more closely now, noticing their spacing, their pattern. There is a rhythm to them, a spacing that suggests how the animal moves, how quickly, how often. A lesser-known detail from early woodland hunting traditions suggests that experienced hunters could predict where an animal might return simply by studying how it moved through its environment. Not perfectly, but often enough to matter. You choose a spot, not directly on the track, but slightly ahead of it, where the terrain narrows between two trees. It creates a natural funnel, a place where movement is guided, whether the animal intends it or not. You kneel there, the snow pressing against your legs, and begin to work. A simple snare, nothing complex, nothing elaborate. You shape a loop from a length of cord, or in this case a thin strip of material you carry. You secure one end to a branch, anchoring it firmly. The loop hangs just above the snow, positioned carefully along the path. You pause, adjusting it slightly. Too high and the animal passes under. Too low and it misses entirely. You test it again, imagining the movement, the height, the angle. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how widespread snare usage was across different medieval regions. Some argue it was nearly universal among common hunters, while others believe it depended heavily on local tradition and available materials. Here it feels like a natural solution. You step back studying your work. It does not look like much, just a loop in the quiet forest. But that is the point. It should not stand out. You brush a little snow around it, softening any signs of disturbance. You take care not to leave obvious traces of your own movement. Even small details can alert cautious animals. A curious anecdote from certain northern communities tells of hunters who would deliberately mask their scent by handling pine needles or rubbing their hands with snow before setting traps. Whether it truly made a difference is uncertain, but it reflects an awareness of how sensitive animals can be. You rub your hands lightly against the bark of a nearby tree, then against the snow, more out of instinct now than certainty. You move a few steps away, then stop. You look back once more. The snare blends into the environment, nearly invisible unless you know where to look. That is enough. You turn and begin to walk back toward your shelter, your pace steady, your breathing controlled. This kind of hunting requires a different mindset. You are no longer chasing. You are preparing. You're setting possibilities into motion and then stepping away, allowing time to do its work. Back at your fire site, you check your arrangement again. The wood is ready, the structure intact. You kneel and begin the careful process of bringing it to life. When the flame finally catches, small and fragile at first, you feel an immediate shift. The air changes, the space changes. Light flickers against the surrounding snow, creating movement where there was none. You hold your hands close, not too close, letting the warmth reach your fingers gradually. It feels almost unfamiliar. After so much cold, even a small heat feels significant. You sit back slightly, watching the fire grow, feeding it carefully, piece by piece. Too much at once would smother it. Too little, and it fades. Balance. Always balance. The forest around you remains dark and quiet, but now there is a centre, a point of warmth and light that anchors you. Some historical interpretations suggest that hunters often checked their traps at dawn and dusk, aligning their movements with the times when animals were most active. It was not just about setting traps, but about understanding when to return. You think about that now. Morning. You will check in the morning. For now you wait. The fire crackles softly, a steady rhythm that contrasts with the silence of the forest. You listen to it, letting your breathing match its pace. Your body begins to relax slightly, though never fully. The cold is still present, just held at bay for a while. You glance once more into the darkness beyond the firelight. Somewhere out there, the forest continues its quiet life. Animals move, paths cross, patterns repeat. And within that vast silent system, you have placed a small, almost invisible thread of intention. A loop, a chance. You lean back slightly, feeling the warmth on your face, the cold still pressing at your back. This is how survival begins to take shape here. Not through force, but through patience, through quiet preparation, through the willingness to let the forest come to you. The fire settles into a steady rhythm beside you, its soft crackle becoming part of the night. You sit there for a while, letting the warmth reach your hands, your face, your thoughts. Beyond the glow, the forest remains dark and unreadable, but you know now that it is not empty. It leaves traces. You just have to notice them. You rise slowly, careful not to move too quickly after sitting still. Your legs feel slightly stiff at first, but they respond as you shift your weight. The warmth from the fire lingers for a moment, then begins to fade as you step away. You do not go far. Just a small circle around your shelter, your eyes lowered towards the ground. The snow is no longer a blank surface to you. It has changed into something like a page marked with subtle lines and impressions that speak quietly of movement. A broadly recognized historical insight tells us that medieval hunters depended heavily on tracking skills, especially until winter when snow preserved details that would vanish in other seasons. Tracks could reveal not only the presence of animals, but their size, their pace, even their state of mind. You crouch near a faint set of impressions you had not noticed before. At first glance, they seem random, just shallow dents scattered across the surface. But as you look closer, a pattern emerges. A spacing, a direction. You follow them with your eyes. The prints are smaller than the ones you saw earlier, lighter, perhaps made by a different animal or by the same one moving more cautiously. You place your hand near one of them, not touching, just comparing size. You begin to imagine the animal that left it. Not clearly, not perfectly, but enough to build a sense of it. Its weight, its movement, its hesitation or confidence. A lesser-known detail from medieval woodland traditions suggests that experienced trackers could distinguish between an animal that was relaxed and one that was alert simply by the spacing and depth of its tracks. A relaxed animal moves evenly. An alert one pauses, shifts, changes direction more often. You study the line again. There are small variations, a slight pause here, a deeper impression there. It is not just movement, it is behaviour. You stand slowly and take a few careful steps along the path, placing your feet beside the tracks rather than on them. Preserving the signs matters. Once disturbed, they tell you nothing. The forest feels different when you move like this. Quieter, more focused. Your attention narrows, not in tension, but in clarity. There is an ongoing scholarly conversation about how much of medieval tracking was formalized knowledge versus intuitive understanding built through years of epopea. Many believe it was a blend, gradual sharpening of perception that came from necessity rather than instruction. You feel that process beginning even now, not mastery, but awareness. You notice how the tracks curve slightly toward a cluster of trees. You follow, your pace slow, your breathing steady. The light from your shire fades behind you, replaced by the dim, diffuse glow of the night sky, filtering through our branches. It is enough to see, but only just as you stop again. Ahead the tracks scatter, slightly becoming less defined. You crouch once more. The snow here is softer, less compact, the impressions spread out, losing their sharp edges. You brush a small area gently with your fingers, feeling the texture. This tells you something too. The animal moved through here when the snow was looser, or perhaps the surface changed afterward. A curious note found in certain regional accounts mentions that hunters sometimes used not only the shape of tracks but the condition of the surrounding snow to estimate how recently an animal had passed. Fresh tracks hold crisp edges. Older ones soften, blur and settle. You look again. These are not fresh. Not immediate, but not old either. Recent enough to matter. You straighten slowly, letting your gaze lift from the ground to the space ahead. The forest stretches outward, layered in shadow and faint light. You cannot see the animal, but you can sense its path. You turn your head slightly, listening. A faint rustle reaches you, carried softly through the trees. You freeze again, not from fear, but from instinct. Your body has begun to understand these patterns. Stillness reveals more than movement. The sound fades, then returns slightly clearer. You do not move toward it. You wait. A widely acknowledged point among historians is that patience was often the defining trait of successful hunters. Not speed, not strength, but the ability to remain still, to let time unfold without forcing it. You feel that now. The cold presses against you as you stand there unmoving, but you accept it. Movement would warm you, but it would also disturb the moment. You choose stillness. The sound shifts again, then disappears. Silence returns deeper than before. You exhale slowly. The forest has spoken, then quieted. You do not chase it. Instead, you step back, retracing your path once more, careful not to erase what you have learned. Each track, each impression, each subtle change in the snow becomes part of your growing understanding. You return to your fire, its glow welcoming you back into its small circle of warmth. You sit again, extending your hands toward the heat, feeling the contrast between cold and warmth more sharply now. The forest is no longer just a place you walk through. It is something you read, something you interpret, something that reveals itself slowly, piece by piece, to those who pay attention. And as you sit there watching the firelight flicker against the snow, you begin to realize that survival here depends not only on what you build or what you carry, but on what you notice, on how carefully you observe the quiet language written all around you. Because in this frozen world, nothing announces itself loudly. Everything important is subtle, and if you learn to see it, to follow it, to understand it, the forest becomes less of an unknown. Not safe, never ever safe, but slightly more familiar. And sometimes that is enough to keep going. You sit by the fire for a while longer, letting the warmth return to your hands and face. The glow steadies your thoughts, but another concern slowly rises to the surface. Food. Not just finding it, but keeping it. If your snare works, if you manage to catch something in the coming days, what then? In this cold survival is not only about the moment of success, but what you do afterward. You glance at the surrounding snow, then at the darker shapes of the trees beyond. The forest itself offers an answer. A widely recognized historical detail tells us that in winter, conditions medieval hunters often relied on the natural cold as a form of preservation. Meat could be stored for days or even weeks if kept frozen and protected from scavengers. You stand brushing a thin layer of frost from your clothing and take a few steps away from the fire. The warmth fades quickly, replaced by the steady presence of cold that now feels almost familiar. You look for a place, not just anywhere, somewhere shaded, somewhere less exposed to direct changes in temperature, a spot where the snow remains deep and undisturbed. You find it near the base of a cluster of trees where the branches above form a loose cover. The snow here looks thicker, slightly denser, less affected by shifting air. You kneel and press your hand into it. Cold, yes, but stable. You begin to clear a small area, brushing away loose snow until you reach a firmer layer beneath. Then you dig slightly deeper, creating a shallow pit. The work is slower now. Your body has already spent energy, and you can feel it in your arms and your breathing. But you continue keeping your movements controlled. There is a lesser-known note from certain medieval northern communities that hunters sometimes created what could be called natural ice cellars. These were simple pits dug into snow or frozen ground used to store meat where temperatures remained consistently low. You shape the pit carefully, not too large, not too deep, just enough. You pause looking at it. It seems simple, almost too simple, but simplicity is often what works best here. You gather a few branches and place them at the bottom, creating a barrier between the stored food and the direct surface of the snow. Then you set a few more aside to use as a cover. You imagine the process. If you catch something, you will not keep it all near the fire. That warmth would spoil it faster than you expect. Instead, you will bring it here, place it carefully, and cover it again. Hidden, protected, preserved. There is an ongoing scholarly discussion about how long meat could realistically be stored in such conditions without spoiling or attracting predators. Some argue it could last surprisingly long in consistent cold, while others suggest that constant vigilance was still required. You consider that now. This pit will not protect against everything. Animals will still smell it. The forest does not ignore opportunity. You stand slowly looking around the area again, thinking not just about storage, but about concealment. You gather loose snow and gently shape it over the pit, testing how easily it blends back into the surrounding surface. From a short distance, it becomes almost invisible. That helps, but it is not enough on its own. A curious detail from certain regional practices suggests that hunters sometimes stored meat at a slight distance from their sleeping area, reducing the chance of attracting predators directly to where they rested. You glance back toward your shelter. Yes, that makes sense. That makes sense. You take a few steps farther from it, measuring the distance in your mind. Not too far. You must still be able to reach it easily, even in darkness or difficult weather. You mark the spot in your memory. A tree with a split trunk, a small rise in the ground, subtle landmarks. You return to the fire once more, sitting carefully, feeling the warmth greet you again. Your body relaxes slightly, though never fully. The forest continues around you, silent but active in ways you cannot always see. You look at the flames, watching how they consume the wood, slowly turning solid material into light and heat. It is a quiet transformation, steady and reliable. Food will be like that too. Something solid, something necessary, something that must be managed carefully. You extend your hands, again turning them slowly to warm each side evenly. There is a widely accepted understanding that medieval hunters wasted very little of what they caught. Meat, fat, bone, hide. Everything had a purpose. In a place like this, waste is not just careless, it is dangerous. You think about that. If you succeed, if your snare holds, you will need to act quickly. Process the animal, divide it, store it. Each step matters. You shift slightly, listening again to the quiet. A faint breeze moves through the trees, barely noticeable, but enough to remind you that conditions can change at any time. You look out into the darkness beyond the firelight. Somewhere out there, your snare waits, unseen, uncertain. It may hold something by morning, or nothing at all. That is part of this wire. Uncertainty, patience, preparation without guarantee. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders rest, your breathing slow. The cold presses gently at the edges of the fire's warmth, always present, always waiting. But now you have more than just warmth and shelter. You have a plan, a place to store what you might gain, a way to extend survival beyond a single moment of success. And as you sit there watching the fire, listening to the quiet forest, you begin to understand that staying alive here is not about one skill or one decision. It is about layers. Clothing, shelter, fire, food, each one supporting the others, each one fragile on its own, but together just strong enough to keep you here a little longer. You sit close to the fire, hands turned slowly toward the warmth, and for a moment it feels almost enough. Almost. But then your throat reminds you of something you have not yet addressed. Water. It is easy to overlook here. Snow surrounds you in every direction, bright and endless, giving the illusion of abundance. But you already sense the problem. Eating snow directly chills your body, stealing heat from within, and in this environment that cost is too high. A commonly accepted historical point notes that medieval hunters rarely consumed snow as it was. Instead, they melted it carefully, turning it into drinkable water, without forcing their bodies to absorb the cold directly. You rise again, slower this time, feeling the stiffness in your legs. The fire crackles softly behind you as you gather a small container. Even something simple, a metal cup or a carved wooden vessel, becomes essential here. You scoop a handful of snow and place it inside. At first it looks like plenty, but as you bring it closer to the fire, something almost disappointing happens. The snow shrinks. It collapses into a thin layer of water at the bottom, far less than you expected. You pause, watching it. That is important. Snow is mostly air. You will need more. You step away, again gathering additional handfuls, packing them slightly tighter this time, before adding them to the container. You return to the fire and hold it near the warmth, not directly in the flames, but close enough to let the heat do its work gradually. The transformation is slow. The snow softens, sinks, turns clear. You watch it carefully. There is a subtle practice mentioned in some lesser-known survival traditions, where hunters would avoid placing fresh snow directly onto a small amount of already melted water. Instead, they would start with a little liquid, first preventing the container from scorching or the snow from burning unevenly. You tilt the container slightly, making sure the water gathers at one side, then add more snow in small amounts. Patience again. Everything here seems to return to that. You bring the container closer, then slightly away, adjusting the distance so it warms without boiling too quickly. Steam begins to rise, faintly curling into the cold air before disappearing. The smell is clean. Almost nothing. Just the faintest hint of warmth breaking through the frozen stillness. You lift it carefully and take a small sip. The water is warm, not hot, but enough. It spreads through your body in a way that feels immediate, almost surprising. Your throat relaxes. Your chest feels less tight. Even your hands seem to respond slightly, as if the warmth has reached further than expected. There is an ongoing academic discussion about whether medieval hunters routinely warmed their water or simply drank it cold when necessary. Some sources suggest warming was preferred whenever possible, especially during extended stays in harsh winter conditions. Sitting here now, the answer feels obvious. Warmth, even in small amounts, changes everything. You take another sip, slower this time, letting it settle. The forest remains quiet around you, but your awareness has shifted inward for a moment. Hydration is not as visible as fire or shelter, but it is just as critical. You set the container down carefully, close enough to the fire to stay warm, but not so close that it overheats. You look at the snow again. So much of it, and yet turning it into something useful requires time, energy, attention. A curious note from certain northern traditions suggests that some hunters would carry small amounts of ice or compacted snow inside their clothing during travel, allowing it to melt slowly from body heat. It sounds uncomfortable, but it provided a steady source of water without stopping. You consider that. perhaps later. For now, the fire is your best tool. You gather more snow, repeating the process, building a small reserve of water. Not excessive, just enough to carry you through the next stretch of time. Your movements are slower now, but more efficient. Less wasted effort, more intention. You notice how your breathing has settled into a steady rhythm again. The earlier tension has softened slightly, replaced by a quiet focus. You sip once more. The warmth feels almost gentle now, no longer surprising, but still welcome. You glance toward your shelter, then toward the direction of your snare. Everything you have set in place exists in a kind of balance. Fire for warmth, shelter for protection, traps for food, and now water carefully made from what surrounds you. There is a well-recognized understanding among historians that survival in such environments depended not on any single skill, but on the ability to maintain several needs at once without neglecting any of them for too long. You feel that, Philemon? Now, if you focus too much on one thing, the others begin to weaken. You take a final sip and set the container down again. The fire continues its steady work, the snow continues to fall in faint, almost invisible traces, and the forest continues its quiet, watchful presence. You sit back slightly, letting your shoulders relax just enough to ease the tension without losing awareness. Your body feels different now, not comfortable, but steadier, more supported. You understand something simple but important. Water here is not found, it is made. And as you sit in the soft glow of the fire, the warmth of it reaching just far enough to matter, you realize that even the most basic needs require care, patience, and attention. Nothing comes easily, but nothing is impossible either. Not if you move slowly, not if you think ahead, not if you respect the quiet demands of the frozen forest. You cradle the last of the warm water in your hands for a moment before setting it aside. The heat fades quickly once it leaves the fire's reach, and you notice how quickly everything here returns to cold when not actively maintained. Your stomach speaks again a little more clearly now. Not urgent. Urgent, yeah. But no longer quiet. You look toward the dark edge of the forest where your snare waits, then back at the fire, then down at your hands. Hunger in this place is not just discomfort, it is calculation. It is fuel or the lack of it. A broadly accepted historical understanding tells us that in cold climates, medieval hunters relied heavily on fat rather than lean meat. Fat burns slowly in the body, producing more sustained energy and warmth, while lean protein alone can leave a person feeling weak and cold despite eating. You imagine that now. Not just eating, but what you would need to eat. Not all food is equal here. You lean forward slightly, feeding another small piece of wood into the fire. It catches slowly, then steadies the flames, rising just enough to keep their shape. Your body shifts closer without you thinking about it. Heat draws you in. You extend your hands again, then pull them back, then extend them once more, adjusting the distance instinctively. Too close and the heat becomes sharp, uncomfortable. Too far and it barely reaches you. Balance again, everything returns to that. You think about the animal you saw earlier. Yes. Small, quick, not much. It would help, but it would not be enough on its own. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some northern hunting traditions that suggests experienced hunters often prioritized animals with higher fat content during winter months, even if they were harder to catch. The extra effort was worth the return. You glance out into the darkness again. Somewhere out there are larger animals, harder to track. Harder to trap, but far more valuable. You exhale slowly, letting the thoughts settle. For now, you work with what you have. You reach for a small piece of stored food, something carried with you, perhaps dried, perhaps preserved from before you entered the forest. You bring it closer to the fire, warming it slightly. The smell is faint but noticeable. Even that small change makes a difference. You take a bite. It is not much, but it is something. You chew slowly, letting your body absorb it, aware that each piece matters. You do not rush. There is no reason to. Eating too quickly does not help you here. A quiet academic discussion exists around whether medieval hunters practiced strict rationing or simply ate when food was available. Some interpretations suggest a careful balance, consuming enough to maintain strength while preserving reserves for uncertain days. You understand that instinctively now. You cannot assume tomorrow will provide. You take another bite, then stop. Enough! For now. You wrap the remainder carefully and set it aside out of direct reach of the fire, but still within your awareness. Your thoughts return to fat again, to its importance, to how it sustains heat from within rather than just around you. A curious anecdote from certain regional accounts mentions that some hunters would render fat into a semi-liquid form and carry it in small containers, using it not only for food but also for cooking, for sealing, even for preserving other materials. You imagine the texture, the way it would feel thick and rich, a concentrated source of energy. You understand why it mattered. Your body even now is burning through what little you have. The cold demands it. Every movement, every breath, every moment of maintaining warmth requires fuel. You shift slightly, pulling your clothing tighter again, tucking your hands closer to your sides. The fire continues its quiet work. The forest remains still. But inside you there is movement, a slow burn, a steady consumption of energy that must be replaced if you are to last. You glance again toward the direction of your snare. Morning! That is when you will know. You lean forward, adding another small piece of wood, careful not to disturb the structure too much. The flames respond, growing slightly, then settling. There is a widely recognized understanding that successful survival in harsh environments depends on anticipating needs before they become urgent. Waiting too long to address hunger, cold, or thirst often leads to mistakes. You feel that truth now. You are not yet in danger, but you are close enough to it that every decision matters. You sit back again, your breathing steady, your body adjusting once more to the balance between warmth and cold. Your stomach settles slightly after the small amount of food, but it does not forget. It reminds you, quietly, consistently. You close your eyes for a brief moment, not to sleep, but to feel the rhythm of your body. The warmth of the fire on your face, the cold at your back, the slow movement of breath in your chest. You open them again. The night continues. The forest holds its silence, and you remain within it, sustained not by abundance, but by careful management of what little you have. You begin to understand that survival here is not about eliminating hunger. It is about controlling it, feeding it just enough, keeping it from growing too strong, keeping yourself steady. And as you sit there watching the firelight flicker, feeling the quiet burn within you, you realize that every small piece of food, every drop of fat, every measured bite becomes part of a larger system, a system that keeps you alive, one decision at a time. You remain close to the fire, watching the flames settle into a steady, reliable pattern. The warmth touches your face and hands, but your thoughts begin to shift again, moving from what you have to what you will need to do next. If your snare holds something by morning, you will not just eat it. You will need to prepare it, cook it, preserve it, use it properly. A widely acknowledged historical point notes that medieval hunters developed simple but effective cooking methods in the wilderness, often relying on open flames, heated stones, or basic suspensions over fire, rather than complex tools. You look at your fire again, seeing it differently now, not just as warmth, but as a place of transformation. You reach for a small stick and gently adjust the burning wood, creating a more even bed of embers. Flames are useful, but embers are steady. They provide consistent heat without sudden bursts. You wait a moment, letting the fire settle. Then you pick up a thicker branch, testing its weight, its strength. It feels solid enough. You begin to strip smaller twigs from it, shaping it into a simple spit. Your hands move slowly, carefully. The cold still lingers in your fingers, making each motion slightly more deliberate, but you manage. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval accounts that hunters often preferred roasting meat on simple wooden spits rather than placing it directly into flames. This allowed for better control and reduced the risk of burning the outer layers too quickly. You imagine that now, turning slowly, evenly, letting the heat work gradually. You set the prepared stick aside, then look around for stones. Not all stones are suitable. Some hold moisture and may crack or even break when heated too quickly. You choose carefully, selecting ones that feel dense solid without visible fractures. You place them near the fire, not directly in it, allowing them to warm slowly. This method has a purpose. Once heated, the stones can be used to cook food more evenly, or to warm your shelter slightly by retaining heat. A quiet, scholarly discussion exists around whether stone heating was a common technique among medieval hunters, or more of an occasional solution. Evidence suggests it varied by region, but where it was used, it proved effective. You watch the stones as they begin to warm. Time passes in small increments. The fire crackles softly. Your breathing remains steady. There is a curious anecdote from certain northern traditions that suggests hunters sometimes placed heated stones near their feet while resting, creating a small pocket of warmth that lasted longer than the fire alone could provide. You consider that. It sounds simple, but here simple things matter. You shift slightly, stretching your legs toward the fire, then pulling them back again, careful not to overexpose them. You imagine the process of cooking. If you catch something, you will need to act quickly. Remove what you can, prepare it, decide what to eat immediately and what to store. You cannot afford waste. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that medieval hunters often used nearly every part of an animal not only for sustenance but for tools, clothing and other necessities. Cooking was just one part of a larger process. You look down at your hands again. They feel steadier now, warmed by the fire, more responsive than before. You pick up one of the stones and test it carefully. Warm, not too hot yet. You set it back down. Patience again. You notice how often that word returns. It is not just a trait, it is a requirement. You lean forward, adding another small piece of wood to the fire, maintaining its balance. Too much fuel and it flares unpredictably. Too little and it fades. You adjust it slightly, then sit back. The forest around you remains unchanged in its quiet presence, but within your small circle of firelight things feel more controlled, more manageable. You imagine holding food over this fire, turning it slowly, watching as it changes from raw to something usable, something sustaining. The smell would shift. The texture would change. It would become something your body can use more easily, more efficiently. There is an ongoing academic conversation about how much cooking improved nutritional absorption in early survival contexts. While exact details vary, it is generally understood that cooking made food easier to digest and provided more accessible energy. You nod slightly to yourself, not in agreement with the theory, but with the reality of it. You will need that. Every advantage matters. You reach again for the container of water, taking a small sip, letting the warmth return briefly. The combination of heat and hydration steadies you. You feel it in your chest, in your hands, even in your thoughts. You set the container down again, placing it where it will stay warm. Your eyes drift toward your shelter, then back to the fire. Everything you have built so far connects. Shelter protects you. Fire warms you. Water sustains you. And soon food will need to be prepared, not just found. You lean back slightly, resting your weight more comfortably, though never fully relaxed. The night continues to deepen. The forest continues its quiet watch. And you remain within this small circle of light, preparing not just for the present moment, but for what comes next. Because survival here is not a single act. It is a chain of actions, each one linked to the next, each one requiring attention, care, and just enough understanding to carry you forward. And as you sit there watching the embers glow steadily, you begin to see your fire not just as warmth, but as a place where raw becomes usable, where effort becomes sustenance, where survival takes shape one careful step at a time. You shift closer to the fire again, letting the warmth reach your hands, but something else draws your attention now. Your fingers. They feel better than before, but not entirely right. There is a faint stiffness, a lingering numbness at the tips that does not fully disappear, even when you hold them near the flames. You rub them together slowly. The sensation returns in small waves. Not pain exactly, but something sharper than comfort. A reminder that the cold has already begun to take small pieces of you quietly without asking. You look down at your hands more carefully. Pale in places, slightly rigid. You flex them again, slower this time. They respond, but not perfectly. A widely accepted observation notes that frostbite was a constant threat for medieval hunters operating in winter environments. It did not always arrive dramatically. Often it began with subtle numbness, a loss of sensation that could easily be ignored until it became serious. You bring your hands closer to the fire, then stop yourself. Too close is dangerous. Rapid heating can cause damage as well. You pull them back, slightly letting the warmth reach them gradually instead. You rub them gently, encouraging movement, encouraging blood to return. There is a lesser-known detail from certain northern survival practices that suggests hunters would often warm extremities slowly, sometimes placing hands under their arms or against their torso before exposing them to fire. The body's own heat was considered safer than direct flame. You try that now. You tuck your hands briefly beneath your arms, feeling the warmth build more slowly, more evenly. It is less immediate than the fire, but steadier. You exhale softly. Better. You bring them back out and hold them near the fire again, careful, patient. Your attention shifts to your feet. You wiggle your toes inside your footwear, testing them the same way. They respond, but the sensation is muted. A dullness that was not there before. You press your heels lightly into the ground, then lift them again. Movement helps, but not enough on its own. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how well medieval hunters understood frostbite as a medical condition versus simply recognizing its symptoms through experience. It is likely they did not use the term, but they knew the danger intimately. You understand it now too, not as a concept, but as a feeling, a gradual loss. You lean forward, adjusting your position, pulling your legs closer to your body, reducing the surface area exposed to the cold. You tuck your feet slightly beneath you, creating a small pocket of warmth. It helps, a little. You look at your face next, touching your nose lightly, then your cheeks. The skin feels tight, slightly numb in places. You rub it gently, encouraging circulation. A curious anecdote from certain medieval accounts suggests that hunters sometimes applied animal fat to expose skin as a protective layer against extreme cold. It acted as a barrier, reducing moisture loss and offering some insulation. You consider that. It makes sense. Another use for fat, another reason it mattered so much. You shift again, pulling your clothing tighter, adjusting layers that may have loosened during movement. Even a small gap can let cold air slip through, undoing your efforts. You check your sleeves, your collar, your lower edges. Small correction, constant awareness. You begin to realize that staying warm is not something you achieve once. It is something you maintain, moment by moment. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that prevention was far more effective than recovery in cold environments. Once frostbite advanced, it became difficult to reverse without lasting damage. You take that seriously. You do not wait for pain. You respond to absence, to numbness, to small changes. You rub your hands again, then your face, then shift your feet once more. Your body becomes something you monitor closely, almost like another environment within the larger one. The fire crackles softly beside you, its warmth steady but limited. You cannot rely on it entirely. You must support it. Support yourself. There is a quiet note found in certain regional traditions that some hunters would perform small repeated movements while resting, flexing fingers, shifting posture, maintaining circulation without expending too much energy. You begin to do the same. A slight movement of your hands, a shift of your feet, a subtle change in position. Not enough to tire you, just enough to keep the body awake, alive. You look out into the darkness again. The forest remains still, its silence deep and unbroken. But within your small circle of light, you are actively resisting something that never stops. The cold. It does not rush. It does not force. It simply waits, pressing gently, consistently until you make a mistake. You lean back slightly, adjusting your posture once more, feeling the balance between warmth and exposure. Your breathing remains steady. Your movements small but intentional. You begin to understand that survival here is not about enduring the cold passively. It is about responding to it constantly. Before it grows, before it takes hold, and as you sit there warming your hands, slowly flexing your fingers, feeling the sensation return in small uneven waves, you realize that awareness is your strongest protection. Not strength, not speed, but attention to the smallest changes, to the quiet signals your body sends. Because in this frozen world, danger rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives in silence, in numbness, in stillness. And only those who notice it early have a chance to push it back. You shift your weight again, feeling the quiet tension between staying still and needing to move. The fire warms your front, your shelter protects your side, but your back still feels the steady presence of cold. It never fully disappears. It only changes shape depending on where you sit, how you turn, what you do. You notice something subtle. Say, when you sit too long, the warmth fades from within. Your muscles cool, your joints stiffen, your fingers begin to feel again. But when you move too much, even slightly faster than necessary, your body begins to heat unevenly. Your breathing deepens, your clothing traps that warmth, and then almost without warning you feel a hint of dampness. That is the danger. A well-supported historical observation explains that medieval hunters had to carefully balance movement and rest in winter conditions. Too much exertion led to sweat, and sweat in freezing temperatures could quickly become a serious risk. Too little movement and the body simply lost its ability to stay warm. You test this balance now. You stand slowly, letting your legs take your weight again. You take a few measured steps, not far, just enough to wake your muscles. Your arms move slightly with each step, your hands flexing gently. Warmth begins to build. Not dramatic, Hey, just enough. You stop. You wait. You feel the change. Your breathing slows again, your body settling back into stillness. The warmth lingers for a moment, then begins to fade, but not as quickly as before. You sit again closer to the fire this time. The difference is noticeable. This rhythm works. There is a lesser-known detail preserved in some regional traditions that hunters often moved in short, controlled bursts during rest periods rather than long walks or complete stillness. It allowed them to maintain circulation without exhausting themselves. You begin to adopt that pattern. A few steps, a pause, a shift in posture, a moment of stillness. You repeat it quietly, letting it become part of your routine. The forest around you remains unchanged, but your relationship to it continues to shift. You are no longer reacting randomly. You're adjusting, refining, learning through small repetitions. There is an ongoing academic discussion about whether medieval hunters consciously followed such patterns or if they developed naturally through experience. It seems likely that necessity shaped behavior long before it was ever explained. You feel that now. You are not thinking about rules. You're responding to what works. You lean forward, add in a small piece of wood to the fire, then sit back again, letting your hands rest near the warmth. You notice your breathing. It has become quieter, more controlled, less reactive. Your body is beginning to conserve energy more efficiently. A curious anecdote from certain northern accounts suggests that some hunters deliberately slowed their movements and even their breathing during extended stays in cold environments, conserving heat and energy by minimizing unnecessary motion. You try that now. You sit still, not rigid, not tense, just calm. Your breath moves slowly in and out, steady and quiet. You feel the warmth of the fire on your face, the cool air at your back, the slight pressure of your shelter beside you. Everything is balanced. For now, you stand again after a short time, repeating the cycle. A few steps, a gentle stretch, a shift of your shoulders. Your body responds. It feels stronger than it did earlier, not because you have gained energy, but because you're using it more carefully. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that endurance in harsh environments often depended more on efficiency than on strength. Those who lasted were not always the strongest, but the most adaptable. You begin to see that clearly. You move again, then stop again, letting the rhythm settle into something natural. The cold remains. It always remains. But you are no longer at its mercy in the same way. You are working with it, managing it, adjusting your behavior to meet it. You glance toward your shelter, then toward your fire, then out into the darkness where your snare waits. Everything is connected. Movement affects warmth. Warmth affects energy. Energy affects your ability to act. You sit again, letting your body rest, but not completely still. Your hands flex gently. Your feet shift slightly. Small movements. Constant awareness. There is a quiet note found in certain historical interpretations that survival often depended on maintaining just enough activity to stay warm without tipping into exhaustion. It is a narrow space easy to miss but essential to find. You feel that space now. You are not comfortable, but you are stable. You lean back slightly, adjusting your posture once more, letting your breathing settle again into that slow, steady rhythm. The fire continues to glow. The forest continues to watch, and you remain here moving just enough, resting just enough, holding yourself within that delicate balance that allows you to continue. Because in this place, survival is not about extremes, not constant motion, not please stillness, but something in between, a quiet, careful rhythm, one that you must maintain again and again if you want to see the next morning. You remain in that careful rhythm for a while, moving just enough to keep the cold from settling too deeply, resting just enough to conserve what little energy you have. The fire continues its quiet work beside you, steady and controlled, and your shelter holds its small boundary against the wind. Your attention begins to drift towards something else now. Your tools. They have been with you since the beginning, but until now they have stayed in the background, quiet and unexamined. Here in the cold they take on a different presence. Not objects, not accessories, extensions of your ability to act. A widely accepted historical understanding shows that medieval hunters depended heavily on a small set of essential tools, a knife often the most important of all, along with a bow, arrows, and sometimes an axe. Each one served multiple purposes far beyond its obvious use. You reach for your knife. The handle feels cold, almost shockingly so, as your fingers close around it. You adjust your grip slightly, letting your hand settle into it. The weight is familiar, reassuring in a quiet way. You turn it slightly, watching how the firelight reflects off the blade. Sharp. It must remain sharp. A dull blade in this environment is more than inconvenient. It wastes energy, slows, every task increases risk. You run your thumb carefully along the spine, not the edge, feeling its shape, its balance. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some medieval accounts that hunters often maintained their tools daily, even when they had not used them. Cold moisture and repeated handling could dull or damage equipment faster than expected. You understand that now. You reach for a small piece of stone, something suitable for sharpening. You hold the blade at an angle and begin to draw it slowly across the surface. The sound is soft, a quiet, steady scrape. You repeat the motion again and again, keeping your movements controlled, consistent. Your hands move carefully, not rushing, not forcing. The act itself feels calming, focused. Each pass restores something, not just the blade, but your sense of readiness. You pause and test it again gently. Better. You set the knife down beside you within easy reach. Next, you consider your bow. It rests nearby, its shape simple but essential. You pick it up, feeling the tension in the wood, the slight resistance of the string. You check the string carefully, running your fingers along it, feeling for any fraying, any weakness. A break here would be serious. A quiet, scholarly discussion exists around how frequently medieval hunters replaced or repaired bowstrings during extended trips. Many believe it was a regular concern, especially in damp or freezing conditions where materials could stiffen and weaken. You flex the bow slightly. It holds, but you remain aware. You will need to keep checking it. You set it back down gently. Then your attention shifts to the axe. Heavier, less precise, but equally important. You lift it, feeling its weight pull against your arm. It is a tool for shaping, for cutting larger wood for building. Without it, many of your tasks would become far more difficult. You examine the edge, not as sharp as the knife, but still effective. You brush away a small bit of frost that has gathered near the blade, then set it down again. There is a curious anecdote from certain regional traditions that suggests some hunters gave their tools names, treating them almost like companions during long periods of isolation. Whether this was practical or psychological is unclear, but it reflects how important these objects became. You can understand that, though. Out here they are more than tools. They are reliability. You arrange them carefully beside you, not scattered, not careless. Each in its place, within reach. You glance at your hands again. They move more easily now, warmed by the fire, steadied by the task. There is a broadly recognized understanding among historians that tools in medieval survival were not specialized in the way modern equipment is. Each item had to serve multiple roles, adapting to whatever need arose. You feel that flexibility now. The knife cuts shapes, prepares food. The axe builds, clears, strengthens. The bow hunts, defends, extends your reach. Each one supports your survival in ways that overlap. You lean back slightly, letting your eyes rest on them for a moment. They do not look impressive, not in this quiet firelight, but their importance is clear. You reach for the knife again, holding it briefly, feeling its weight, its balance. Then you set it down once more. Your movements are slower now, more deliberate. The cold still lingers, but it no longer disrupts you in the same way. You've adapted, at least for now. You glance toward the darkness again. Your snare waits, your shelter holds, your fire burns, and your tools remain ready. Everything you have depends on them. Everything you do will pass through them. You shift slightly, pulling your clothing closer, settling back into your position near the fire. The forest remains vast, quiet, and indifferent, but within your small circle of light you have order, preparation, readiness. And as you sit there watching the faint glow of the fire reflect off the metal of your knife, you begin to understand that survival is not only about what you endure, it is about what you maintain, what you protect, what you keep ready for the moment it is needed. Because here in this frozen world, hesitation costs more than effort, and the tools in your hands may be the difference between continuing forward or stopping entirely. You rest your hands near the fire again, letting the warmth settle into your fingers, but your thoughts drift outward into the darkness beyond the glow. You are not alone here. The forest has been quiet, almost too quiet. But you know that silence does not mean absence. It simply means you have not yet crossed paths with what moves beyond your sight. You lift your gaze toward the trees, their dark shapes stretching upward, their branches heavy and still. Somewhere between them, unseen other lives continue. A well-supported historical insight tells us that medieval hunters were always aware of predators sharing the same environment. Wolves, bears, and other large animals were not constant threats, but that they were never ignored. You shift slightly, listening more carefully now. The fire crackles. Your breathing remains steady, and beyond that, the forest holds its quiet. You think about wolves first, not because they are the most dangerous, but because they are the most likely to notice you. They move in groups, communicate through sound and scent, and cover ground efficiently. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval accounts that suggests wolves were often more cautious of humans than aggressive, especially when fire was present. Still, hunger and opportunity could change that balance. You glance at your fire. It is more than warmth. It is a signal, a boundary. You add a small piece of wood, maintaining its presence, making sure it does not fade. Then you think about bears. Less predictable, more powerful. Though many would be dormant during the coldest months, not all were. Disturbing one even by accident would be a serious mistake. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how frequently medieval hunters actually encountered bears during winter expeditions. Some sources suggest it was rare, while others indicate that such encounters, though uncommon, were deeply feared. You look at the ground around you. No large tracks, no signs of recent disturbance. That is something, but not certainty. You shift your posture slightly, turning your body so you can see more of the forest while still feeling the warmth of the fire. Your awareness stretches outward, listening, watching. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions tells of hunters who would deliberately keep small fires burning through the night, not only for warmth, but to deter animals from approaching too closely. The light and scent of smoke created a boundary that many creatures avoided. You understand that instinctively. The fire must remain. You glance at your stored wood, measuring it silently. Enough for now, but not endless. Everything here is measured. You pick up a small branch and toss it into the flames, watching as it catches slowly, then steadies. Your tools rest nearby. Your shelter holds, but your safety is never absolute. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that medieval hunters did not rely on a single method of protection. Awareness, fire positioning, and sometimes even simple barriers all work together to reduce risk. You look around your immediate area, the trees, the spacing, the visibility. You note where shadows gather more heavily, where movement might go unnoticed. You adjust your position slightly, ensuring that your back is partially protected by your shelter, while your view remains open toward the darker edges. You do not want surprises. You listen again. A faint sound, very distant. It could be wind or something moving. You do not react quickly. You wait. The sound does not repeat. Silence returns. There is a quiet debate among scholars about how much of medieval survival depended on accurate interpretation of such sounds versus simple caution. Not every noise meant danger, but ignoring them entirely was not wise either. You choose the middle, a middle path. You remain aware, but not alarmed. You lean forward slightly, resting your hands near the fire, letting its warmth ground you again. Your breathing remains steady. Your body still. Your senses active. You realize something important. Fear here is not loud. It does not rush at you. It exists quietly just beneath the surface, reminding you to pay attention. You glance once more into the darkness. Your eyes adjust slowly, picking out shapes, patterns, slight differences in shadow. Nothing moves. Or if it does so beyond your perception. You exhale softly. The forest continues its quiet life around you, filled with creatures that navigate it far more easily than you do. You are the outsider here, the one who must adapt. You reach for another piece of wood and add it to the fire, maintaining that small circle of light. It flickers, gently pushing back against the darkness just enough. You feel its importance more clearly now. Not just warmth, not just light, but presence. A sign that you are here, that something stands against the cold and the quiet. And as you sit there watching the fire, listening to the distant stillness, you begin to understand that survival is not only about managing your needs, it is also about respecting what surrounds you, recognizing that the forest is shared, that you are not its master, only a temporary guest. And if you remain aware, careful and steady, you may pass through it without drawing too much attention. But if you forget, if you become careless, the silence may not remain so kind. You sit quietly, your gaze drifting between the fire and the dark shapes beyond it. The forest has settled into a deeper stillness, now, one that feels heavier than before, as if the night itself has thickened. And then you begin to notice something else. Sound, not the absence of it, but the presence of small, almost imperceptible layers within it. The fire crackles softly, a steady rhythm that you have grown used to. Your breathing moves in and out, slow and controlled. But beyond that, the forest speaks, very quietly. A faint creak somewhere above you, wood shifting under the weight of frost. A soft whisper of snow falling from a branch in the distance. The subtle movement of air threading its way between trees. You tilt your head slightly, listening more carefully. A widely accepted historical observation suggests that medieval hunters developed an acute sensitivity to nighttime sounds. Without artificial light or constant noise, their awareness sharpened, allowing them to distinguish between harmless background sounds and those that signaled movement or danger. You begin to understand that now. At first, everything blends together, then slowly patterns emerge. You hear a small irregular sound to your left. You pause. Not sudden, not tense, just attentive. The sound repeats, faint and uneven. Perhaps snow that's snow shifting. Perhaps something smaller moving beneath it. You do not move toward it. You let it exist. There is a lesser-known detail from certain woodland traditions that hunters often learn to categorize sounds instinctively. Not by naming them, but by recognizing their rhythm and consistency. Repetition often meant something alive. Randomness often meant the environment settling. You listen again. The sound fades. Nothing follows. You exhale quietly. The forest returns to its layered silence. But now you're more aware of it. You notice how different parts of the forest seem to carry sound differently. Open spaces allow it to travel further. Dense clusters of trees absorb it, soften it, change its direction. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how accurately medieval hunters could determine distance and direction based on sound alone. Some researchers suggest a high level of skill, while others believe it was often an educated guess shaped by experience. Standing here, it feels like something in between. You can sense more than you could before, but certainty remains just out of reach. You shift slightly, adjusting your posture, letting your back rest more comfortably against your shelter, while your eyes remain fixed on the darker edges beyond the firelight. Your ears do most of the work now. The fire continues its soft rhythm. The trees creak occasionally. And then something new. A distant call. Very faint. It rises briefly, then fades. You freeze again, but not from the fear. From focus. The sound lingers in your mind. Not loud, not sharp, but distinct. You wait. It does not repeat immediately. A curious anecdote from certain northern regions tells of hunters who could identify specific animals by their nighttime calls even at great distances. It was not just about hearing, but about memory, about familiarity built over time. You do not yet have that familiarity, but you recognize that the sound was not random. You remain still listening for it again. Time passes. The cold presses gently at your back. Your hands rest near the fire, absorbing what warmth they can, and then faintly the sound returns. Longer this time. Drawn out. You feel a slight tension in your chest, not panic, but awareness. It could be a wolf, or something else. The distance is hard to judge, the direction uncertain. There is a quiet scholarly debate about whether such calls were used by animals primarily for communication within their group or as territorial signals meant to be heard by others. In either case, they carry meaning within the forest. You listen carefully. The sound fades again, leaving the silence deeper than before. You exhale slowly. You do not move. There is nothing to chase, nothing to confront. Leslie, something to understand. You glance at your fire, then add another small piece of wood, maintaining its presence. The flames respond, flickering slightly higher before settling again. You feel a subtle reassurance in that. Light, warmth, a boundary. You turn your attention back to the forest. The darkness remains unchanged, but your perception of it has shifted. It is no longer empty. It is filled with small signals, quiet movements, distant voices. You begin to understand that nighttime here is not a void. It is a different kind of activity, one that reveals itself only if you listen carefully. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that surviving the night required more than just physical preparation. It required mental steadiness, the ability to remain calm in the presence of unfamiliar sounds and unseen movement. You feel that challenge now. Your mind wants to interpret every sound to assign meaning to imagined possibilities, but you resist that. You focus on what is real, what you can hear, what you can control. Your breathing, your position, your fire. You sit there steady and quiet, letting the sounds come and go without chasing them. The forest continues its subtle conversation around you, filled with things you do not fully understand yet, but you are learning, slowly, patiently. And as you listen to the faint echoes of movement in the distance, to the occasional creak of wood, to the soft whisper of falling snow, you realize that the night is not something to fear. Not if you remain aware, not if you remain calm. Because here in this frozen silence, survival depends not only on what you can see, but on what you can hear, and how well you can remain still long enough to understand it. You remain seated, listening as the forest settles into its slow, steady rhythm. The distant sounds fade in and out, never fully disappearing, but never fully revealing themselves either. Over time, your mind begins to adjust, not trying to interpret every noise, but allowing them to pass without tension. And then something else becomes noticeable, the quiet inside your own thoughts. At first, there was constant awareness. Every movement, every sound, every sensation felt sharp and immediate. But now, as the night deepens, your thoughts begin to stretch out, owing slightly, as if they too are adapting to the pace of this place. You are alone, completely. A widely accepted historical observation suggests that medieval hunters often spent long periods in isolation, especially during winter expeditions, days, sometimes weeks, without direct human contact. The physical challenge was only part of it. The mental weight of solitude could be just as significant. You feel that now, not as fear, not as discomfort, but as a presence. A space where conversation does not exist, where no one answers, where every thought remains your own. You shift slightly, adjusting your position near the fire, letting its warmth remind you of something steady, something constant. Your breathing remains slow. Your hands rest loosely near your knees. The forest continues its quiet life around you. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval accounts that some hunters would speak aloud to themselves during long periods of isolation, not out of necessity, but as a way to maintain a sense of connection, to hear a human voice even if it was their own. You consider that. You do not speak. Not yet, but the idea lingers. You look at the fire again, watching the flames move gently, rising and falling in a rhythm that feels almost calming. Your thoughts begin to wander. Not far, just enough to notice the absence of other people. No voices, no footsteps, no shared moments. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how the individuals in such environments managed prolonged solitude without losing focus or clarity. Some theories suggest that routine small tasks and constant awareness of the environment helped anchor the mind. You begin to see how that works. Every action you take has purpose. Every movement matters. There is little room for distraction. And in that focus, the mind finds something to hold on to. You reach forward, adjusting a small piece of wood in the fire, then sit back again. The act is simple, but it grounds you. You notice how your senses remain active even in stillness. Your ears continue to listen. Your eyes continue to scan the edges of the firelight. Your body remains aware of temperature, of position, of subtle changes. You're never completely at rest. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions suggests that hunters sometimes developed a kind of quiet companionship with their surroundings, treating the forest itself as something familiar rather than something distant. You begin to understand that. The trees, the snow, the sounds, they are no longer entirely foreign. They are becoming part of your awareness. You shift again, stretching your legs slightly, then pulling them back, maintaining that careful balance between movement and rest. Your thoughts settle further. The earlier tension has softened. Not gone, but quieter. You realize something. Loneliness here is different. It is not the same as being alone in a crowded world. It is deeper, more complete, but also strangely more peaceful. There is a broadly recognized understanding among historians that those who adapted to solitude often found a kind of calm within it, while those who resisted it struggled more. You feel yourself leaning toward that calm. You are not resisting. You are observing. You are present. You look out into the darkness again. The forest remains vast, but it no longer feels entirely overwhelming. It feels distant, not in a physical sense, but in a mental one. You are here, within your firelight, within your small space of control, and beyond that the forest exists on its own terms. You do not need to understand all of it at once. You only need to understand your part in it. You take a slow breath, then another. Your body feels steady. Your mind feels quieter. There is a small, almost unnoticed shift happening. You are becoming accustomed to this. Not comfortable, but capable. You glance once more at your tools, your shelter, your fire. Everything remains in place. Everything continues to function. You are still here, and as you sit in the soft glow of the flames surrounded by the quiet presence of the frozen forest, you begin to understand that survival is not only about physical endurance. It is about mental steadiness, the ability to remain calm, to accept the silence, to move through it without fear. And in that acceptance, something changes. The forest is no longer something you are simply enduring. It becomes something you are living within. And for now, that is enough. You sit in the quiet for a while longer, your thoughts steady, your breathing calm, your senses gently spread across the seas around you. The fire continues to glow, and the forest beyond it remains vast and dim. And then a new concern rises, not sharply, but with quiet persistence. Direction. You have moved only a short distance so far, staying close to your shelter, your fire, your known space. But if you're to remain here for days, perhaps longer, you will need to move further, to check traps, to gather wood, to search for signs of life. And that means one thing. You must not get lost. A well-established historical understanding indicates that medieval hunters relied on a combination of natural markers to navigate. The position of the sun when visible, the direction of prevailing winds, the shape of the land, and even the growth patterns of trees all contributed to their sense of direction. You look around now not just at what is near, but at what extends beyond. The trees, the slope of the ground, the subtle rise and fall of the terrain. You stand slowly stepping a short distance away from the fire, then turning to face it again. You have fixed it in your mind. This is your center, your point of return. You turn again slowly, taking in the surrounding area from different angles. The split trunk of a nearby tree, the slight incline of the ground toward your shelter, the way the branches above thin slightly in one direction. These details matter. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval woodland practices, suggesting that hunters often memorize small clusters of landmarks rather than relying on a single point of reference. A group of features created a more reliable mental map. You begin to build that map now, not on paper, but in your mind. You take a few steps away from the fire, then stop and turn back again. Still visible? Good! You take a few more steps slightly farther this time. The firelight dims, becoming softer, less defined. You pause. You turn. You look. You mark the direction again. Then you step back toward it, returning to your original position. This small movement teaches you something. Distance changes perception quickly. Even a short walk can alter how things appear. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how medieval hunters maintained orientation in dense forests where visibility was limited. Some scholars suggest that constant recalibration, frequent stops to reassess position, was key to avoiding disorientation. You practice that now. You step out again, this time in a slightly different direction. A few steps, pause, turn, observe. The trees look different from this angle. The fire is partially hidden now, its light flickering through branches rather than shining directly. You adjust your position slightly until you can see it clearly again. You note how that adjustment feels, how small changes in direction can restore or obscure your point of reference. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions tells of hunters who would deliberately mark their path with subtle signs, a bent branch, a disturbed patch of snow, something that could guide them back without being obvious to others. You consider that. You reach down and press your foot more firmly into the snow, creating a slightly deeper impression. Not too obvious. Just enough. You take another step, then another, creating a faint line of marks that you can follow back. You turn again. The fire is still there, faint but present. You walk back toward it, following your own steps, noticing how easy it is to lose them if you do not pay attention. Snow shifts, light changes. Everything blends quickly. You return to your original spot and sit again, your awareness sharper now. You understand something important. This place does not offer clear paths. It offers subtle cues, and it is up to you to recognize them. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that successful navigation in such environments depended less on rigid direction and more on continuous awareness of surroundings. A fixed path could be lost, awareness could be maintained. You feel that difference now. You are not trying to memorize a route. You are learning to read the space around you. You glance upward, though the sky is mostly hidden by branches. Still, you can sense the direction of the open space above the faint glow of the night sky filtering through. Another reference point, another layer of understanding. You look back toward your shelter, then toward your fire. Everything remains in place. You are still oriented, still aware, still connected to your center. You lean back slightly, letting your body rest again, your mind holding on to the patterns you've just observed. The forest remains vast, but it feels slightly less overwhelming now. Not because it has changed, but because you have begun to understand how to move within it, carefully, deliberately, always aware of where you are and how to return. And as you sit there, the firelight flickering gently, the darkness stretching outward in every direction, you realize that survival here is not just about staying warm or finding food. It is about knowing where you stand and how to find your way back. You remain seated for a while, your awareness gently tracing the boundaries of your small camp, your mind still holding the pattern of trees' slope and light. The fire continues its steady glow, and the forest beyond it remains quiet, though not empty. Then you notice something subtle. The air feels different, not dramatically, not suddenly, but enough to draw your attention. The stillness you have grown used to begins to shift, as if something unseen is moving through the space above you. You tilt your head slightly, listening. The trees respond first. A faint whisper passes through their upper branches, soft and uneven. Snow loosens from somewhere above, falling in a quiet cascade that brushes against lower limbs before settling on the ground. You stand slowly. Your body reacts before your thoughts fully form. Something is changing. A well-supported historical observation notes that medieval hunters paid close attention to early signs of weather shifts, especially in winter. Storms could arrive with little warning, and recognizing subtle changes in wind sound and air pressure often meant the difference between preparation and exposure. You take a slow breath. The air feels sharper now, colder somehow despite already being cold. You look upward, though the sky is mostly hidden. The faint light filtering through the branches seems dimmer, more diffuse. You listen again. The wind moves slightly stronger this time, not forceful but more consistent. You feel it against your face, then your clothing. You turn your body instinctively, adjusting your position so the wind meets you at an angle rather than directly. Small changes, immediate response to it. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval accounts that hunters often watched how snow moved along the ground to predict incoming weather. Light drifting patterns could indicate shifting winds long before a storm became visible. You glance down. Fine snow begins to slide across the surface in thin lines, tracing the direction of the breeze. It's faint but noticeable. You follow its movement with your eyes. Stay! Directional, not random. You understand, this is not just a passing shift. It may become something more. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how accurately early hunters could predict storms based solely on environmental cues. Some interpretations suggest remarkable skill, while others propose that even experienced individuals were sometimes caught off guard. You feel the uncertainty in that now. You do not know what is coming, but you recognize that something is. You turn back toward your shelter. It stands as you left it, a simple barrier against the wind, but now you see its limitations more clearly. You step closer and begin to reinforce it. You gather additional branches, pressing them more tightly together, filling small gaps where air might pass through. You pack snow against the outside, creating a thicker layer. Snow again becomes an ally. You work steadily, not rushing, but not delaying either. Your hands move with purpose. The cold presses against them, but the activity keeps them responsive. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions suggests that some hunters would deliberately overbuild their shelters at the first sign of changing weather, even if it seemed unnecessary at the time. The cost of extra effort was small compared to the risk of being unprepared. You understand that instinctively. You add more, then more, until the structure feels stronger, more solid. You step back and assess it. Better, not perfect. Perfect, but better. You turn toward the fire. It still burns steadily, but you know that wind can change that quickly. You adjust its structure, lowering the profile slightly, bringing the burning wood closer together to protect the core of the flames. You add a few thicker pieces, ones that will burn longer, reducing the need for constant adjustment. There is a broadly recognized understanding among historians that maintaining fire during changing weather required careful management, not just feeding it but shaping it to resist external conditions. You feel that now. The fire is no longer just warmth. It is something you must protect. You glance outward again. The forest seems to hold its breath. The wind continues slightly stronger, now moving through the trees with a more consistent voice. You listen for other signs. A drop in sound, a change in pressure, something in the air. You cannot name it exactly, but you can feel it. You return to your shelter and sit again, pulling your clothing tighter, positioning yourself where the reinforced barrier offers the most protection. Your breathing remains steady, but your awareness sharpens. You are ready. As ready as you can be. You look once more towards the direction of your snare. It waits out there, exposed to whatever is coming. You accept that. You cannot control everything, only what is within reach. A quiet scholarly discussion suggests that medieval hunters often made difficult choices in such moments, deciding what to protect and what to leave to chance. Survival required prioritization. You feel that now. Your shelter, your fire, your position. These come first. You lean slightly toward the fire, feeling its warmth, watching its movement, ensuring it remains stable. The wind continues to move through the forest, carrying with it the possibility of something larger. Snow may fall. The temperature may drop. Conditions may change. You do not know how much, but you are prepared to endure it. You settle into your position, your body aligned with the shelter, your eyes on the fire, your ears tuned to the shifting sounds around you. And as the forest begins to change its tone, its quiet voice deepening into something more active, you understand that survival here is not only about reacting. It is about anticipating, reading the signs, acting early. before the storm fully arrives. You sit close to your reinforced shelter, watching the fire and listening to the slow change in the wind. The forest feels different now, less still, more alive in a restless way. It reminds you that nothing here remains constant for long. And then your thoughts move beyond this small circle, beyond your shelter, beyond your fire. You begin to consider something larger. Paths, not the kinds that are clearly marked, not roads or trails as you might imagine them, but subtle routes through the forest shaped by movement over time. Not just by people, but by animals, by seasons, by necessity. A well-established historical insight indicates that medieval hunters often followed natural routes rather than creating their own. Animal trails, riverbanks and ridgelines provided the easiest and safest ways to move through dense and unfamiliar terrain. You stand slowly stepping just beyond your shelter, your eyes scanning the surrounding area with a different kind of attention. You are no longer just looking for immediate survival. You are looking for connection. You notice a slight depression in the snow a short distance away. Not a single track, but a repeated one, faint but consistent. You walk toward it, carefully placing your feet beside the marks rather than over them. The line curves gently between trees, following a natural contour in the land. You crouch, slightly studying it. This is not random. It is used. Perhaps by animals, perhaps at times by people. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval woodland accounts, suggesting that hunters often learned to recognize these subtle paths, not because they were obvious, but because they were efficient. They led somewhere useful: water, shelter, feeding grounds. You follow it for a few steps. Not far, just enough to understand its direction. It moves downhill slightly, then levels out, disappearing into a denser cluster of trees. You pause. You do not want to lose sight of your fire. You turn and look back. The glow is still visible, though faint, through the branches. You fix that in your mind again, then you turn back to the path. You do not follow it fully. Not now, but you remember it. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how medieval hunters shared knowledge of such routes. Some believe these paths were passed down through generations, while others suggest that much of the knowledge was rediscovered individually through repeated experience. You can see how both might be true. Some paths feel intentional, others feel discovered. You step back from the trail and return toward your shelter, your pace steady, your awareness still anchored to your surroundings. The wind continues to move through the trees, but your focus remains clear. You sit again near the fire, letting its warmth settle into you once more. Your mind holds on to the image of that path, where it might lead, what it might offer. A curious anecdote from certain regional traditions tells of hunters who would leave subtle markers along such routes, small signs only they would recognize, allowing them to navigate even when snow covered their tracks. You consider that. Perhaps a broken twig placed in a certain direction. A small arrangement of stones. Something simple. Something quiet. You look around your immediate area again, noting where such markers could be placed if needed. You are beginning to think ahead, not just about the next hour, but about the next day, and the day after that. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that long-term survival in wilderness environments required not just reaction but planning, knowing where to go, how to return, and what resources lay along the way. You feel that shift now. You are no longer just enduring the forest. You are beginning to map it, even in small ways. You lean forward, adding another piece of wood to the fire, maintaining its steady burn. The flames respond, rising slightly, then settling again. The wind brushes against your shelter, but it holds. You glance once more toward the direction of the path. It is out there, waiting, a connection to something beyond your immediate space. You understand its importance, not just as a route, but as a possibility, a way to expand your reach without losing your way. You sit back again, your body relaxed, but your mind active. The forest remains vast, but it feels slightly more structured now. Not fully known, but less chaotic. You have your shelter, your fire, your snare, and now a path. Each one adds a layer of underlying standing. A layer of control, and as you sit there watching the firelight flicker against the snow, feeling the wind move through the trees, you begin to realize that survival here is not only about staying alive in one place. It is about learning how to move, Careful, deliberately, with purpose, and always knowing how to return. You sit close to the fire, letting its warmth settle into your hands, but your eyes drift toward your clothing, your tools, the small details that have carried you this far. Nothing here remains untouched by the cold. Everything wears down slowly, quietly, and that includes what you depend on. You lift your sleeve slightly, examining the fabric. It looks the same at first glance, but when you run your fingers along it, you notice a stiffness where moisture has frozen, a slight roughness where fibres have begun to strain. A firmly supported historical insight points out that medieval hunters had to maintain their clothing and gear constantly, especially in winter. Small tears, loose stitching, or damp material could quickly become serious problems if ignored. You pull your sleeve closer to the fire, not too close, just enough to let the warmth ease the stiffness. You rub the fabric gently between your fingers, feeling it soften slightly as the frost melts. It is a small change, but it matters. You look at the seam near your wrist. There, a slight weakness. Not torn yet, but close. Close. You reach for your knife, using its tip carefully to tease out a loose thread. Then you take a strip of material, something spare, something you can afford to use. You begin to reinforce the seam, tying it, tightening it, securing it as best you can. Your fingers move slowly, the cold still present in them, but the fire helps. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval sources that suggests hunters often carried small pieces of cloth or cord specifically for repairs, knowing that their clothing would not endure harsh conditions without constant attention. You understand that now. This is not maintenance for comfort, it is maintenance for survival. You finish the adjustment and test it, pulling gently at the seam. It holds, for now. You lower your sleeve and shift your attention to your footwear. You lift one foot slightly, brushing away snow that has gathered along the edge. You press the material, checking for dampness, for stiffness. There is some, not severe, but enough to notice. I don't do this. You move your foot closer to the fire, turning it slowly, allowing the warmth to reach it without overheating. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how medieval hunters managed prolonged exposure of footwear to snow and moisture. Some interpretations suggest frequent drying near fire, while others indicate that constant movement helped prevent freezing from setting in too deeply. You see both sides of that now. Movement helps, but rest demands care. You rotate your foot again, then switch to the other, repeating the process. Small adjustments, constant attention. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions tells of hunters who would stuff dry moss or grass inside their footwear to absorb moisture and provide additional insulation. It was not elegant, but it was effective. You glance around. Snow covers most of the ground, but beneath it there may be material you can use. You kneel slightly and brush aside a small patch, revealing bits of dry plant matter pressed beneath the surface. You gather a small amount, bringing it back to your fire. You test it with your fingers. Dry enough. You tuck it lightly into your footwear, adjusting it so it does not bunch or press unevenly. You lower your foot again. The difference is subtle, but present. You feel a slight buffer, a separation between your skin and the cold material. You repeat the process for the other foot. There is a broadly recognized understanding among historians that such small improvisations often made the difference in long-term survival. Not grand solutions, but quiet adjustments that accumulated over time. You feel that clearly now. You shift your attention to your tools again. Your knife, your bow, your axe. You check each one not for immediate use, but for condition. The knife remains sharp. The bowstring still holds. The axe is steady. You brush away frost where it has gathered, ensuring nothing stiffens beyond use. You place them carefully back in their positions. Nothing left to chance. You sit back again, your hands resting near the fire, your clothing slightly warmer, your footwear slightly more protected. The wind continues to move through the trees, but your shelter holds. The fire burns steadily. Your body feels more secure, not safe, but supported. You realize something. Nothing here lasts on its own. Everything requires attention. Clothing weakens, tools wear, materials shift, and if you ignore those changes, they grow, quietly, until they become problems you cannot easily fix. You lean forward once more, adjusting a small piece of wood in the fire, then sit back again. Your breathing remains steady. Your movements calm. You look out into the darkness, then back at your small circle of light. Everything you have is here, maintained, repaired, watched. And as you sit there feeling the slight improvement in your clothing, the subtle comfort in your footwear, you begin to understand that survival is not only about finding resources, it is about preserving them, extending their usefulness, caring for what you have so it continues to serve you. Because in this frozen world, replacement is not guaranteed. But careful attention, that is always within your control. You sit quietly after attending to your clothing and gear, feeling a slight sense of stability return. The fire continues to glow, your shelter holds, and your body feels just a little more prepared than before. And then a quieter concern begins to surface. Not some dear media, not something dramatic, but something that grows slowly if ignored. Illness. You shift slightly, noticing how your body feels beyond the obvious cold. There is a subtle heaviness in your limbs, a faint dryness in your throat. Despite the water you drank, a slight fatigue that goes deeper than simple tiredness. A well-supported historical insight indicates that medieval hunters faced significant risk from illness during long winter expeditions. Even minor conditions, if left unmanaged, could become serious when isolation and cold limited recovery. You take a slow breath. Your chest feels clear. Your breathing's steady. That's good. You tilt your head, slightly swallowing. Your throat is dry again. You reach for your container, taking a small sip of water, letting it settle. Better, but not enough to ignore. You set it down and pull your clothing tighter, ensuring there are no gaps where cold air might slip through. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval sources that suggests hunters often paid close attention to early signs of discomfort, dryness, fatigue, stiffness, because waiting until symptoms worsened could leave them with few options. You understand that instinctively. You cannot afford to wait. You rub your hands together slowly, then your arms, generating a bit of warmth through movement. Not enough to tire you, just enough to maintain circulation. You adjust your position again, sitting in a way that reduces pressure on any one part of your body for too long. Small changes, constant care. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how much medieval hunters understood about illness in a medical sense versus practical observation. While they may not have had detailed knowledge of causes, they were highly attuned to effects and responses. You feel that now. You do not need to name every risk. You only need to notice when something begins to shift. You lean forward slightly, adding a small piece of wood to the fire, then hold your hands near the warmth again. Your fingers respond quickly this time. That is a good sign. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions tells of hunters who would warm stones and place them near their chest or under their clothing to maintain core warmth when feeling weak or chilled. You glance at the stones you prepared earlier. You pick one up carefully. Warm, not too hot. You wrap it in a piece of cloth and bring it close to your torso, holding it there. The warmth spreads slowly, deeper than the fire's surface heat. You feel it in your chest, steady and calming. You breathe slowly, letting that warmth settle. Your body responds, not dramatically, but enough. There is a broadly recognized understanding among historians that maintaining core temperature was critical to preventing serious health decline in cold environments. Extremities matter, but the center of the body must remain stable. You focus on that now. Your breathing, your chest, the steady rise and fall. You shift again, ensuring your back is protected from the wind, your front supported by the fire, your sides enclosed by your shelter. Everything aligned. You close your eyes briefly, not to sleep, just to feel. Your body is tired, but not failing. Your mind is alert, but not strained. You open your eyes again. The fire continues to burn. The forest continues its quiet presence. You are still here, still functioning. You take another small sip of water, then stop. Enough! You cannot consume everything at once. Balance again. You notice how your thoughts remain clear, how your awareness has not dulled. That matters. A subtle note from certain historical interpretations suggests that mental clarity was often one of the first indicators of declining condition. Confusion, slow reactions, poor decisions. These signs could appear before physical symptoms became obvious. You remain attentive to that. You think clearly. You respond steadily. That's good. You adjust your position once more, pulling your legs slightly closer, maintaining warmth, reducing exposure. The wind continues softly. The night deepens. You feel the quiet weight of time passing. You are not just surviving the environment. You are maintaining yourself within it. Every small action, every adjustment, every moment of awareness contributes to that. You lean slightly toward the fire again, letting its warmth reach your face, your hands, your clothing. Your body feels steadier now. Not fully rested, but stable. You look out into the darkness again, then back to your small circle of light. Everything remained as always. And as you sit there holding the warmth close, managing your breath, your posture, your hydration, you begin to understand that survival here is not only about external challenges, it is about internal balance. Recognizing when something is off, responding before it grows, caring for yourself as carefully as you care for your shelter, your fire, your tools, because in this frozen world you are not separate from the environment. You are part of it. And if you begin to fail, the forest does not adjust. It simply continues. So you remain attentive, steady, aware, and for now that's enough to keep warming. You sit with the warmth of the stone still faintly held against your chest, the fire steady beside you, your body balanced between rest and awareness. The forest continues its quiet presence, the wind still moving gently through the trees, reminding you that nothing here remains still for long. Your eyes drift toward your wood supply. Not much. Enough for now, but not for long, and that thought settles in quietly but firmly. Fuel. Fire cannot continue without it. A well-grounded historical observation explains that medieval hunters in winter environments often spent a significant portion of their time gathering and managing firewood. Without a steady supply, even the best shelter and preparation could quickly become meaningless. You look at the fire again. It burns steadily, consuming what you have placed into it, turning solid wood into heat and light. Each piece you add is time. Each piece you burn is time lost. You stand slowly, feeling the slight stiffness in your legs, then step just beyond your shelter, scanning the ground carefully. You do not want to wander far, not at night, but you cannot ignore this. You begin to gather what you can reach safely. Small branches first, then slightly larger ones. You test each piece as you pick it up, snapping it gently. Dry wood gives a clean break. Damp wood bends. You choose carefully. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval woodland practices that hunters often collected more wood than they thought necessary before nightfall, knowing that conditions could change and movement could become more difficult. You understand that now. You should have gathered more earlier, but you adapt. You move slowly, keeping your fire within sight, never straying beyond where you can see its glow clearly. Each trip is short, controlled. You return, place the wood near your shelter, then go again, back and forth. The rhythm feels familiar. Movement, pause, return. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how medieval hunters balanced fuel gathering with energy conservation. Carrying too much at once could exhaust you, but making too many trips also costs energy. You find your own balance. Small loads, frequent returns. You place the gathered wood in a small pile, organizing it by size without thinking about it. Smaller pieces for starting, medium pieces for building, larger ones for sustaining. You notice how natural that feels now. How quickly your mind has adapted to these patterns. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions suggests that some hunters would keep a reserve of wood separate from their immediate supply, hidden or protected in case of sudden need or unexpected conditions. You consider that. You take a few pieces and set them aside, slightly removed from the main pile, covered lightly with snow to protect them from wind. A small reserve. It feels reassuring. You return to the fire and kneel beside it, adjusting the wood carefully. You do not add too much, just enough to maintain a steady burn. The flames respond, rising slightly, then settling again into their quiet rhythm. You extend your hands toward the warmth, feeling the difference immediately after being away from it. Your fingers loosen. Your breathing steadies. You sit back again, letting your body rest. But your awareness remains active. You look at the pile of wood. then at the fire, then at the darkness beyond. Everything here is measured. Nothing is unlimited. There is a broadly recognized understanding among historians that resource management was one of the most critical aspects of survival in harsh environments. It was not just about finding what you needed, but using it wisely. You feel that clearly now? You cannot burn wood carelessly. You cannot gather without thought. You must consider how long each piece lasts, how much you have, how much you will need. You lean forward again, adjusting a piece of wood that has shifted slightly, ensuring the fire remains stable. Your movements are precise, intentional. You glance toward your shelter, then toward your snare. Everything remains in place. The wind continues softly. The forest remains vast. You sit back, pulling your clothing closer, letting the warmth settle into your body again. Your legs feel slightly tired from the movement, but not strained. You have managed it well. There is a subtle note in certain historical interpretations that those who survived longest were often those who learned to think ahead in small increments, not days, but hours, not abundance, but sufficiency. You understand that now. You are not preparing for everything. You are preparing for what comes next, and then the next. You take a slow breath, then another. Your body feels steady. Your fire burns. Your wood is gathered. For now, that is enough. And as you sit there watching the flames consume the wood you have just collected, feeling the warmth reach your hands and face, you begin to understand that survival here is not about having endless resources. It is about managing what you have, carefully, deliberately, always aware. George, peace matters. Because in this frozen forest, even something as simple as a branch can mean the difference between warmth and cold, between light and darkness, between continuing and stopping. You settle back beside the fire, the newly gathered wood stacked within reach, your shelter steady at your side. The wind has eased slightly, though it still moves through the trees in a soft, restless way. The forest never truly settles, it only changes its rhythm. Your gaze drifts outward again toward the darker stretches beyond your firelight. You begin to think about the animals, not just where they are, but how they move, when they move, and why. A well-established historical perspective explains that medieval hunters depended heavily on understanding seasonal animal behavior, especially in winter. Creatures did not wander randomly. They followed patterns shaped by food, shelter, and instinct. You recall the tracks you studied earlier, the spacing, the direction, the subtle pauses. You begin to piece together a picture. Animals must conserve energy just as you do. They will not travel far without reason. They will follow paths that offer the least resistance. They will return to places where they have found food before. You lean forward slightly, studying the snow beyond your shelter as if expecting new marks to appear. Not yet, but soon. There is a lesser-known observation from certain medieval woodland traditions suggesting that experienced hunters often spent as much time predicting animal movement as they did actually hunting. Knowing where an animal might go was often more valuable than knowing where it had been. You understand that now. Tracking is not just about the past, it is about the future. You glance towards the direction of your snare. It sits along a narrow path placed with intention, but you begin to wonder, is it in the best place, or simply the first place you chose? There is an ongoing academic discussion about how precise medieval hunters were in selecting trap locations. Some scholars suggest deep familiarity with animal routes, while others believe much of it involved trial and adjustment. You consider that. Perhaps you will need to move it, or add another. Not tonight, but soon. A curious anecdote from certain northern regions tells of hunters who would observe a single animal's path over several days before setting a trap, learning its habits, its timing, even its preferred routes. You do not have that luxury yet, but you can begin to build that knowledge. You stand slowly, taking a few careful steps away from the fire, scanning the ground once more. The snow reflects faint light enough for you to notice small disturbances, slight variations in texture. You crouch again, studying a faint line that you had overlooked before. Not fresh, but not old either. It crosses your earlier path at an angle. Different. A second route. You trace it with your eyes. It leads toward a denser area of trees where branches hang lower, offering more cover. That makes sense. Shelter. Protection. You nod slightly, not in certainty, but in recognition. Animals think in patterns. Just as you're beginning to, there is a widely recognized understanding among historians that winter forced both humans and animals into more predictable behaviors. Limited resources and harsh conditions reduced randomness. You see that clearly now. Everything becomes more focused, more deliberate. You stand again and return to your fire, your mind holding onto the image of that second path. You sit down, extending your hands toward the warmth. The fire responds as it always does, steady and quiet. You think about tomorrow, about checking your snare, about possibly setting another, about watching more carefully, learning more, each day adding a small piece to your understanding. There is a subtle note in certain historical interpretations that the most successful hunters were not those who relied on strength or speed, but those who adapted their approach based on what the environment revealed. You feel that shift happening in you. You're no longer guessing blindly. You're observing, adjusting, refining. You glance once more into the darkness. The forest remains vast, but it feels less chaotic now, more structured, more readable. You begin to see it not as a single space, but as a collection of patterns, paths, movements, habit. You lean back slightly, letting your body rest again, your mind still active but calm. The fire continues to burn. The wind moves softly. The night deepens, and somewhere out there, unseen, the animals continue their quiet routines. Moving along the paths, you are beginning to notice. Following patterns you are beginning to understand. And as you sit there watching the glow of your fire against the snow, you realize that survival here is not just about reacting to what appears. It is about anticipating what will, seeing not only what is in front of you, but what is likely to happen next. Because in this frozen forest, nothing moves without reason. And if you can learn those reasons, even slowly, even imperfectly, you begin to close the distance between you and survival. One pattern at a time. You sit quietly, the fire steady beside you. The forest stretching outward in dark, layered silence. The patterns of movement, the tracks, the wind, the shifting air, all of it settles into your awareness. And then, your thoughts move somewhere less visible. Not to the ground, not to the trees, but to meaning. You have spent hours observing, adjusting, learning. Yet there is something about this place that feels older than your actions, something that seems to exist beyond practical survival. A well-documented historical perspective notes that many medieval hunters held spiritual beliefs connected to the forest. They did not always see it as empty land, but as something inhabited not only by animals, but by unseen forces, presences that shape their behavior and mindset. You look around slowly. The trees stand still. The snow lies quiet. The fire burns softly. Nothing moves. And yet the space feels full. You shift slightly, your body relaxing just enough to let your mind wander a little further. You think about how it must have felt to live in a world where the forest was not just a place, but something with intention, something that could offer or withhold, guide or mislead. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval traditions that hunters sometimes performed small rituals before entering or moving deeper into the forest. Not elaborate ceremonies, but simple gestures, a moment of stillness, a quiet acknowledgement. You sit still now, not performing anything, but noticing the instinct, the desire to pause, to recognize where you are. There is an ongoing academic discussion about whether these practices were rooted in belief, habit, or psychological need. Some interpretations suggest that such rituals helped hunters focus, calm their minds, and prepare themselves for the uncertainty ahead. You understand that clearly. Out here, certainty is rare. Anything that brings steadiness matters. You glance at your fire again, watching how it moves, how it consumes, how it holds its shape against the surrounding cold. It feels almost like a companion, not alive, but present. A curious anecdote from certain northern accounts suggests that some hunters treated fire with a kind of quiet respect, never letting it go out unnecessarily. Sometimes even addressing it in soft words as if acknowledging its role in their survival. You do not speak, but you understand the feeling. You lean forward slightly, adjusting a piece of wood, ensuring the fire continues to burn steadily. Your movements are slow, deliberate, almost careful in a way that goes beyond simple function. You sit back again. Your eyes drift to the trees. Their shapes seem different in the firelight, more defined in some places, more obscured in others. Shadows shift gently as the flames move. You find yourself watching them not for danger, but for pattern, for presence. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that belief systems often influenced how individuals interpreted their environment. In the absence of full knowledge, a meaning filled the gaps. You feel that now, not as belief, but as awareness. The forest does not explain itself. It simply exists. And your mind-seeking connection begins to shape that existence into something understandable. You take a slow breath, then another. Your body remains steady. Your mind calm. You are no longer thinking only about what you need to do. You are experiencing where you are. The cold, the silence, the faint movement of wind, the steady presence of fire. All of it blends into something larger. There is a subtle note found in certain historical interpretations that time spent in isolation, especially in natural environments, often led individuals to develop a deeper sense of connection with their surroundings. You begin to feel that, not strongly, but enough to notice. You are not separate from this place. You are within it, responding to it, adapting to it. You shift slightly, pulling your clothing closer, maintaining warmth, maintaining awareness. The night continues, the forest remains, and you sit within it not just as a survivor but as an observer, a participant in a space that holds more than just physical challenges. It holds silence, depth, a kind of quiet presence that cannot be fully explained. And as you sit there watching the fire, listening to the stillness, you begin to understand that survival here is not only about managing the physical world, it is also about finding steadiness within the unknown. Accepting what you cannot control, moving carefully within what you can, and allowing yourself just for a moment to feel the weight of the forest not as something threatening, but as something vast, something ancient, something that continues whether you are here or not, and for now you are part of it. Quietly, carefully, present, you sit with that quiet sense of presence for a while, the fire steady or shelter, holding your thoughts calm. The forest feels vast but no longer entirely unfamiliar. And then, without warning, something shifts. A sharp sound cuts through the stillness. Not distant, not soft, close. You turn your head immediately, your body reacting before your thoughts fully catch up. Your senses sharpen your breathing, pause your eyes, scanning the edge of the firelight. Another sound, a sudden drop of snow from above, heavier than before, falling from a branch that must have been holding more weight than you realized. It hits the ground with a dull, compact thud. You remain still, listening. Nothing follows, but your body does not relax right away. A well-supported historical observation explains that medieval hunters often faced moments where the line between danger and harmless disturbance was unclear. Reacting too quickly could waste energy. Ignoring something important could be worse. You hold your position. You let the moment settle. Your heart beats a little faster, not in panic, but in heightened awareness. You listen again. The forest returns to its quiet rhythm. No further movement, no approaching sound, just the soft wind and the faint crackle of your fire. You exhale slowly. Your body begins to ease, though not completely. There is a lesser known detail from certain medieval accounts that hunters sometimes experienced sudden brief moments of alarm caused by natural events. Falling branches, shifting ice, even animals moving unseen nearby. These moments tested their ability to remain calm and assess, rather than react impulsively. You understand that now. You did not move. You did not waste energy. You observed. You assessed. You remained. You shift slightly, adjusting your position near the fire, letting its warmth steady you again. But something has changed. Not the forest. Your awareness. You realize how quickly conditions can shift from calm to uncertain, how easily the quiet can be broken. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how medieval hunters managed these sudden moments of tension over long periods. Some scholars suggest that repeated exposure built resilience, while others propose that constant vigilance simply became a normal state. You feel that process beginning. You are not startled in the same way. You are attentive, prepared. You glance upward briefly, noting the branches above your shelter, heavy with the snow. You make a small adjustment, shifting slightly so that you are not directly beneath the heaviest accumulation. A simple precaution. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions suggests that hunters often avoided resting directly under large branches for this exact reason. Snow buildup could release suddenly sometimes with enough force to disrupt a shelter or extinguish a fire. You nod slightly to yourself. Another detail to remember. You lean forward, checking your fire again, ensuring it remains stable. The flames continue steadily, unchanged, reliable. You add a small piece of wood, then sit back again. Your breathing returns to its slower rhythm. Your body settles, but your awareness remains sharper than before. You look out into the darkness once more. The forest stretches outward, filled with unseen movement, unseen weight, unseen possibilities. Not all of them dangerous, but all of them real. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that survival in such environments often involved responding correctly to uncertainty rather than eliminating it. You could not control every variable, but you could control how you reacted. You feel that clearly now. You did not rush. You did not ignore. You remained, and that made the difference. You shift your legs slightly, maintaining circulation, maintaining warmth. Your hands rest near the fire, steady and calm. The wind continues softly. The night deepens, and the forest returns to its quiet, watchful state. You sit within it, aware now that calm is not permanent, that at any moment something can change. A sound, a movement, a shift in the environment, and your role is not to control it, but to respond carefully, steadily, without panic. You take a slow breath, then another. Your body feels balanced again. Your mind clear. The moment has passed, but the lesson remains. You lean back slightly, letting your shelter support you, your fire warm you, your awareness extend outward just enough. And as you sit there listening to the quiet forest once more, you understand that survival here is not about avoiding every sudden moment. It is about meeting them with calm, with attention, with the ability to pause, observe, and decide. Because in this frozen world, it is not the unexpected that causes failure. It is the reaction to it. And tonight you have learned to hold that reaction steady. You settle again after the sudden noise, your body easing back into stillness, your breathing returning to its slow, steady rhythm. The forest resumes its quiet presence as if nothing had happened, as if the moment of tension had been only a brief interruption. But something in you has changed, not dramatically, not visibly, but in a way that settles deeper. You feel more capable, not because the forest has become easier, but because you have responded to it without losing control. You lean slightly toward the fire, letting the warmth reach your hands again, feeling the contrast between what you were when you first arrived and what you are now. A widely accepted interpretation of historical survival accounts suggests that extended time in harsh environments often led to gradual adaptation, not just physical, but mental. Individuals learn to conserve energy, to recognize patterns, and to respond with greater efficiency. You feel that shift clearly. Your movements are quieter, your decisions more measured, your awareness more constant. You no longer react to every sensation. You choose which ones matter. You reach forward and adjust a piece of wood in the fire, not because it demands immediate attention, but because you anticipate its change. That is new. You notice it. There is a lesser-known observation from certain medieval sources that hunters often became more efficient over time, not by working harder, but by working less unnecessarily. Every movement became intentional. You begin to see that in yourself. You shift your posture slightly, but only as much as needed. You move your hands, but only enough to maintain warmth. You gather your thoughts, but without forcing them. There is an ongoing scholarly conversation about how quickly individuals could adapt to such conditions. Some suggest it took weeks, while others propose that necessity accelerated the process significantly. You feel that urgency. You have not been here long, but already you are different. You glance toward your shelter, then your fire, then the direction of your snare. Each element holds its place in your awareness. Nothing's forgotten. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions tells of hunters who, after extended time in the wilderness, found it difficult to return to slower, less attentive ways of living. Their senses had adjusted to constant awareness. You wonder about that. You can already feel a hint of it, a sharper attention, A quieter mind. You sit back slightly, letting your body rest while your awareness remains active. The forest continues its quiet motion. The wind moves gently. The night deepens. You feel a subtle strength in your posture now. Not physical strength, but steadiness. You're no longer overwhelmed by the space around you. You are within it. A broadly recognized historical understanding suggests that survival in such environments often depended on this shift from reacting to understanding, from uncertainty to familiarity, even if that familiarity remained incomplete. You recognize that change in yourself. You are still cautious, still alert, but no longer uncertain in the same way. You know what to do, or at least you know how to respond. You lean forward again, taking a small sip of water, then setting it aside. Measured. Controlled. You do not rush. You do not waste. Your actions follow a pattern now, a rhythm that aligns with the environment rather than working against it. You glance once more into the darkness. It feels different, not less dangerous, but less unknown. You understand more of its patterns, more of its silence, more of its movement. You shift your legs slightly, maintaining warmth, maintaining circulation. Your body responds easily. You're no longer fighting it. You are working with it. There is a subtle note in certain historical interpretations that those who adapted best were those who accepted the environment rather than resisting it. Acceptance did not remove danger, but it reduced unnecessary struggle. You feel that acceptance now? Not complete, but present. You lean back slightly, letting your shelter support you, your fire warm you, your awareness extend outward just enough. Everything is in balance for now. And as you sit there, the firelight flickering softly, the forest stretching endlessly beyond you, begin to understand that survival here is not a single achievement. It is a process, a gradual change, a series of small adjustments that over time reshape how you move, how you think, how you exist within this place. You are still learning, still adapting, but you are no longer at the beginning. You have taken your first steps into understanding, and that more than anything gives you a quiet sense of strength, enough to continue, enough to face what comes next. You sit in that quiet steadiness for a while, the fire low but controlled your shelter, holding your body balanced between rest and awareness. The forest stretches outward, dark and patient, but your thoughts begin to turn towards something beyond this place. Not the next hour, not the next task, but the path back. You are focused on staying here, surviving here, building a small system within the forest that allows you to endure. But at some point there will be a need to leave, to return to something more stable, more predictable. And that requires preparation. A well-grounded historical insight notes that medieval hunters rarely treated their journeys as one-way experiences. Even when travelling deep into remote forests, they kept track of how to return, marking paths mentally or physically to ensure they could retrace their steps. You look around again, but this time with a different purpose. Not just to survive here, but to remember how to leave. You stand slowly stepping just beyond your shelter, then turn back to face it. You fix it in your mind again. The shape of your shelter, the position of your fire, the surrounding trees. Ease. You turn slightly, looking at the slope of the ground, the direction of the faint path you noticed earlier. Each detail becomes part of a larger picture. You begin to trace your earlier movements in your mind. Where you walked, where you paused, where you found tracks. There is a lesser-known detail from certain medieval accounts that suggests hunters often built a mental map of their surroundings by linking small landmarks together, rather than relying on a single direction. You follow that instinct now. The split tree near your shelter, the shallow dip in the ground near your firewood pile, the narrow path leading downhill. Each one connects. You take a few careful steps outward, then turn again. You check your orientation. The fire remains visible. The shelter stands clear. You step back, returning, confirming. There is an ongoing academic discussion about how accurate these mental maps could be over long distances, especially in environments where snow could cover tracks and alter familiar features. Some scholars believe they were remarkably reliable, while others suggest they required constant updating. You feel that necessity now. Nothing here stays exactly the same. Snow shifts. Light cheese, small changes. Paths fade. You must adjust continuously. You sit again, your body settling, your mind holding on to the structure you've begun to build. You imagine moving beyond this area, following the path, marking your route, checking your position, always aware of how to return. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions tells of hunters who would pause at intervals during their journey, turning around deliberately to view the path as it would appear on their return. The landscape often looked different in reverse. You consider that. It makes sense. You stand again, take a few steps outward, then turn back. The view shifts. The shelter looks different from this angle. The fire appears smaller, more distant. You take that in. You memorize it. Then you return. Each small movement strengthens your understanding. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that successful return journeys depended not on speed, but on careful navigation patience, and the ability to recognize subtle cues in the environment. You feel that clearly. You will not rush. You will not assume. You will move carefully along. You sit once more, your body relaxed but your mind active. Your fire continues to burn. Your shelter holds. Everything remains in place. But now you're thinking beyond it. Beyond this night. Beyond this small space. You glance toward the direction of your snare, then toward the path, then back to your fire. All of it connects. All of it matters. You understand that leaving will not be a simple act. It will require the same attention, the same patience, the same awareness that brought you this far. You lean forward slightly, adding one more piece of wood to the fire, ensuring it remains steady. The flames rise briefly, then settle. You sit back again. The forest remains vast, but it no longer feels endless. It has structure, paths, connections. You are beginning to understand how to move through it, not just to survive, but to return. And as you sit there, the firelight soft against the snow, your shelter steady at your side, your mind tracing the invisible lines that lead outward and back again, you realize that survival is not complete until you can leave. Not just endure the forest, but navigate it, understand it, and find your way beyond it. You sit quietly, the fire now lower its glow softer and more even, the flames no longer reaching high, but settling into a calm bed of embers. The wind has eased, and the forest returns to that deep, layered stillness you've come to recognize. Everything feels slower now. Your movements, your thoughts, even the way the night seems to pass. You draw your hands a little closer to the warmth, not out of urgency, but out of habit, letting the heat rest gently against your skin. The sharp edge of the cold feels less intrusive now, as if it has softened into something you can accept rather than resist. A well-established historical perspective suggests that those who spent extended time in harsh environments often developed a quiet familiarity with them. Not comfort exactly, but a steady understanding that replaced fear with calm awareness. You feel that now. The forest no longer feels like something you have entered. It feels like something you are part of. You glance outward into the darkness beyond your firelight. The trees stand as they have all night. Still, patient, endless, but they no longer seem overwhelming. They are simply there. You shift slightly, adjusting your posture, letting your back rest more fully against your shelter. Your body responds easily without the stiffness you felt earlier. Even your breathing feels different, deeper, slower, more settled. There is a lesser-known observation from certain medieval accounts that hunters often described a sense of quiet rhythm after long periods in the wilderness. Their movements, their thoughts, even their perception of time seem to align with the environment around them. You recognize that rhythm. You're no longer rushing, no longer reacting. You are simply here. There is an ongoing scholarly discussion about whether this sense of calm was a form of adaptation or a necessary mental state for survival. Some believe it emerged naturally, while others suggest it was something individuals learned to cultivate. You do not need to decide, you feel it. That is enough. You reach forward and gently adjust a piece of wood, more out of habit than necessity. The embers shift slightly, glowing brighter for a moment, then settling again. The light flickers softly against the snow, creating slow-moving shadows that seem almost alive, though you no longer mistake them for anything more. A curious anecdote from certain northern traditions tells of hunters who, after returning from long stays in the forest, would sometimes miss the quiet. The absence of constant noise, the steady rhythm of nature, became something they carried with them. You can understand that. Even now, the silence feels full, not empty, but complete. You take a slow breath, then another. The air is still cold, but it no longer shocks you. It moves through you gently, something familiar, something expected. You let your eyes rest on the fire, watching the glow rather than the flames. It is softer now, more stable, more enduring. A broadly recognized understanding among historians is that survival in such environments often came down to endurance rather than speed. Not dramatic moments, but quiet persistence, the ability to continue to maintain, to remain. You feel that clearly. You have not conquered this place. You have simply learned how to exist within it. You shift slightly, pulling your clothing closer, not because you're uncomfortable, but because it feels natural. Your body knows what to do now. Your mind follows. You glance once more into the darkness. The forest stretches outward unchanged, vast as ever. But your place within it feels defined. You are here, present, aware, and that's enough. You lean back a little further, letting your body rest more fully, your breathing slow even more. The fire continues to glow, the night continues to pass, and you remain steady and quiet, held within this small circle of warmth and understanding. The fire dims a little more, its glow softening into a gentle, steady light that barely reaches beyond your immediate space. You feel no urgency to change it, no need to add more wood just yet. The warmth it provides is quiet now, subtle enough. Your eyes begin to relax, no longer scanning constantly, no longer searching for movement. The forest remains as it is, vast and still, but it no longer asks anything more from you. You take a slow breath, letting it settle deeply, then release it just as gently. The cold rests around you, not pressing, not demanding, simply present. You shift slightly, finding a position that feels natural. Your body supported by the shelter, your warmth held close by your coating and the fading fire. The sounds of the forest soften, the faint movement of wind, the occasional quiet creak of wood, all of it blending into a steady, almost soothing rhythm. You let your eyes close for a moment, then open them again. The fire glows softly. The snow reflects just enough light to keep the darkness from feeling complete. Everything is calm. You take another slow breath, and another. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to change. You are warm enough, safe enough, aware enough. The forest continues as it always does, but you no longer feel the need to follow every sound, every shift. You can simply rest within it. Your breathing slows further, your body settles, your thoughts quiet, and as the last of the fire's glow flickers gently beside you, you feel yourself drifting not away but deeper into this calm, steady presence. The night holds you, quietly, gently, without urgency.